Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunting Whispers. I'm aware that many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if each of you could leave a comment letting me know which part of the world you're listening from. Also, give a like and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Okay, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I laughed when my 3-year-old son said he was a reincarnated serial killer, until he started naming the victims. I'm a pretty rational guy, urban planner, born and raised in Philly, spent my career focused on data, zoning regulations, and architectural design. I've never had time for the supernatural, but now I'm dealing with things that have no rational explanation. It started a few days ago while I was in my home office reviewing blueprints for a downtown project. Maria, Ethan's nanny, appeared in the doorway, looking a bit more anxious than usual. "Mark, can I show you something?" she asked, holding one of Ethan's drawings. "What's up?" I replied, expecting to see the usual. A family portrait with stick figures and lopsided heads, or maybe an abstract blob of color that I'd have to pretend I understood. But when she handed me the paper, I nearly choked. Instead of bright colors or playful shapes, it showed a dark, crooked building. Lines scribbled in black crayon, jagged and rough, with what looked like staircases or doorways unevenly sketched along the sides. "What's this?" Maria's fingers tightened on the paper. He said, "That's where the bad things happened," and then he just kept drawing. I sighed, attempting to lighten the mood. He's probably just copying something he saw on TV or one of my blueprints. Maybe he saw a building I was working on, and his imagination ran wild. Maria didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She's been with us for over a year, through the thick of the divorce, and I know she cares about Ethan. But kids are kids, right? They see things, make things up, and go through phases. That's all it was, just a phase. But then it wasn't. The next day, Ethan showed me another drawing. This time, the building looked even more detailed. The windows were more defined, and he'd added a door off to the side. But what really threw me was the number scrawled at the top. 49. It was centered, bold, and unmistakable. Ethan was 3. He didn't know what an address was, let alone how to put a number on a building. "Why do you keep drawing this building, buddy?" Ethan didn't look up from his crayons. "Because it's where they live," he said, his voice oddly flat. "Who lives there?" "The people who screamed." I glanced at Maria, who was standing nearby, her arms crossed and a worried look on her face. I didn't say anything then. What was I supposed to say? That my kid was just making things up, or that this was somehow normal? I decided to let it go, hoping, no praying, that this would all blow over. But it didn't. As I tucked Ethan into bed, he began muttering softly in his sleep. At first, it was the usual gibberish, half-formed words and mumbles. But then, clear as day, I heard him say, "Jonathan." A moment later, he added in a whisper, "She screamed too much." Later, I had the worst nightmare of my life. I found myself standing in front of a decrepit building, the same one from Ethan's drawings. The windows were cracked and covered in grime, the walls dark and crumbling as if time itself had forgotten them. The number 49 loomed above the entrance, larger and more vivid than in any of my son's sketches. I tried to move, to turn away, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It was as if I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze from the building. Then, from somewhere deep inside, I heard the faintest sound, a muffled scream, growing louder and more desperate. The screams turned to cries for help, and then I heard a voice, Jonathan's name, spoken in a child's voice that I recognized all too well. I woke up drenched in sweat. This wasn't just some random dream. It was a warning. I couldn't ignore it. I had to figure out what was really going on. The next day, I headed to City Hall to show the sketch to my buddy in real estate and planning. He knows practically every building in the city, old, new, abandoned, you name it. If anyone could recognize the place Ethan kept drawing, it'd be him. Dante Moretti, mid-50s, graying temples, always sharp in a suit, glanced up from the sketch, his reading glasses halfway down his nose. "Your kid drew this?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, he's been sketching it nonstop lately." "Any idea where it is?" Dante let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Man, you don't recognize this place?" 49 Ravens Lane. It was all over the news a few years back. People couldn't stop talking about it. "Why? What happened there?" Dante's face darkened. 3 murders, spread over a few years. Then the guy who lived there, Jonathan Adler, jumped off the roof. That was about 3 years ago. Jonathan Adler? I repeated. The name was exactly what Ethan had whispered to me last night. Dante nodded. Yeah, the whole thing was pretty gruesome. How'd your kid even know about this place? I had no idea. When I pulled up in front of 49 Ravens Lane, it was like stepping into one of Ethan's drawings. Every window, every door, it was all there, exactly as he'd sketched it. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the entrance, my shoes crunching on the scattered debris. The building loomed overhead, its walls covered with graffiti and the brickwork stained from years of neglect. As I approached the rusted front door, I noticed the old doorbell panel beside it. 3 names were faint but legible: C. Harper, J. Lewis, and M. Evans. A chill crept over me as I unfolded Ethan's drawing from my pocket. I hadn't noticed it before, but there they were, those same names, scribbled in his uneven handwriting. How could Ethan have known? I rushed home. Bursting into Ethan's room, I found him playing quietly with his toys. I knelt beside him, trying to steady my voice. Ethan, I asked, pointing to the panel he had drawn, how did you know those names? C. Blake, J. Owens, M. Harris. Who are these people? He glanced up at me, calm and unbothered. They're the ones who screamed, he replied, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. My stomach tightened. And how do you know that? Ethan's eyes met mine, and a faint, knowing smile crossed his lips. Because I'm Jonathan, he whispered. Jonathan Adler. If you thought that was chilling, the next story will leave you breathless. Ever thine, ever mine. My sister and I have always been attached at the hip, literally. Being conjoined twins is like being in a lifelong 3-legged race, except your partner is both your best friend and your worst enemy. You move in sync, but you also fight over every decision, left or right, fast or slow, now or later. There's no escaping it. We share everything, our movements, our thoughts, even our heart. We've always done everything together. There was never a choice, for better or worse. But what happened on that fishing trip? That was something I never imagined we'd share. It was a sunny day on the lake, the kind of family outing that felt ordinary, peaceful. Our parents had brought us out for a relaxing afternoon. Fishing rods, sandwiches, the works. Mom was setting up lunch on the picnic table, and we were helping her, passing plates and cutting bread, one of us holding the knife, the other steadying the food. It was a routine we had perfected over the years. That's when the fox appeared. At first, it seemed curious, sniffing the air around our picnic. But then it lunged. I didn't even see it coming, but my sister did. It clamped down on her arm, snarling, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh. She screamed, a sound that echoed through me like a thunderclap. I tried to pull her back, but we're connected, and there was nowhere to go. It bit her again, and again. By the time Dad shot the thing, its teeth were stained with her blood. The hospital trip was a blur. Doctors stitched her up, while I sat there, numb, tethered to her by our shared flesh, feeling her pain as if it were my own. They talked about rabies, about shots that would protect us both. But we share a heart, a circulatory system, parts of our nervous system. We're not like other people. The treatment didn't work. Days passed, and my sister started to change. At first, it was small things: restlessness, twitching. She complained of feeling hot, then cold. Her eyes became wild, darting around as if they were tracking something I couldn't see. I could feel the heat radiating off her, our bodies connected, her fever coursing through me. I got tired, but not like her. She wouldn't sleep, her muscles tensing, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Then came the violence. One night, while we were alone in our hospital room, she turned on me. It was as if something inside her had snapped. Her eyes, once so familiar, now gleamed with a terrifying, primal madness. Before I could even call for help, she lunged at me, teeth bared, her fingers clawing at my skin. We fought, struggling against each other, but I couldn't escape her. Not when we were bound together, our bodies tethered by flesh and bone. She bit me twice before the nurses rushed in, sedating her, pulling her back just enough to keep me alive. Now I sit here in this cold, sterile room, waiting. The doctors say she has rabies, and it's too late for her. They've tried every treatment, every sedative, but nothing seems to calm the animal inside her for long. She's dangerous, violent. She's not her anymore. They've separated us as much as they can. horizontal cushioned bars attached to the hospital bed, fabricated to fit between us safely and securely. The dense, padded plastic presses against our upper torsos, snug around our ribs. Soft enough to protect our skin, yet firm enough to keep us apart. It's an unyielding divider, designed specifically to restrain her without hurting me, a desperate measure to contain the growing madness. I can still hear her, though. Low, guttural growls, her shallow, rapid breaths. Sometimes she laughs, a twisted, hollow sound that no longer belongs to her. I can feel the infection inside her, pulsing through our shared heart, our connected blood. The doctors check me constantly, waiting for any sign that I might be next, but so far I've remained lucid. Every day I watch her through the bars, her eyes wild, her body twitching in its restraints, and I wonder how much longer I can hold out. She's been sedated for days now, slipping in and out of consciousness, but even in sleep, I can feel her presence gnawing at the edges of my mind. Every now and then, her body jerks violently against the restraints, the metal rattling as if she's trying to break free. The worst part isn't the separation, it's the waiting. Knowing that I'm losing her, knowing that she's still there, but no longer the sister I've always known. The doctors tell me she's gone, that the rabies has taken her mind, her soul, everything that made her my sister. But we share a body. I can still feel her. I can still feel the rage, the hunger, seeping into me. They told me I should say goodbye. But how can I? We've shared everything, every moment, every breath, for as long as I can remember. How do you say goodbye to someone when you're not only losing them, but losing yourself too? When every word sticks in your throat, because you're not just letting go of your sister, you're saying goodbye to your loved ones, to everything, before you even have the chance to mourn the loss of yourself. How do you face the end when it's not just hers, but yours too, creeping closer with every breath? Every time I feel our heartbeat, I feel weaker. I whispered to her today. I told her I loved her, even though I know she's not really there anymore. I told her I'm sorry, that I didn't know how to save her. I'm typing my final goodbye, searching for the right words. The room is quiet, except for the faint hum of the machines around us. My hands tremble, the weight of everything pressing down as I try to let go. But then I feel it, a subtle, disturbing shift beside me. I glance over, and my blood runs cold. My sister's wide, bloodshot eyes are open, staring at me through the cushioned bars. Her lips curl into a maniacal smile, teeth gleaming in a way that makes my stomach twist. She doesn't blink, just keeps smiling as her body jerks harder, the restraints straining under her movements. I freeze. The words on the screen blur, my hand hovering over the keyboard, forgotten. My sister is awake. Just when you think it couldn't get scarier, the next story takes fear to a whole new level. The hospital I work at has very strange ways and rules when it comes to performing autopsies. I'm a resident in my 3rd year, and I've just been transferred here. So far, I can't say it's been boring. Can you, ever? I've met countless patients with the rarest diseases and been through a lot of difficult situations. I guess that's the adrenaline-inducing medlife everyone craves. I was prepared to feel confused, disgusted, even scared. And yet, not in this way. I haven't been too precise. Let me rephrase. The hospital I've been transferred to is in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking forgotten village in a valley, almost no signal, maximum 300 people. Why would I take this job, you ask? Well, they pay me well, and you know how difficult it is for residents to actually make some money. My parents were skeptical at first. Why would they look for staff so desperately that they're willing to pay you that much? Well, Mom, frankly, it's not my business. It is if they're making you do weird shit. Joe, no bad language around little Mel, my mother shushed my sister. Will they, though? She followed, frowning. I don't think so. They're just lacking personnel. Think about it. No one wants to go to Fucksville in the middle of nowhere and waste their time. Pardon, I meant gain experience. For 7 months, they have to attract you in some way. Okay, but call. Or don't, my dad said. Spare us. It's enough. I have to listen to you complain 24/7 here. Don't want a mini you on the phone saying the same stuff. All right, I mocked him. I really didn't think anything interesting was going to happen anyway. Mostly old people going for the billionth checkup just to get out of the house and make sure they don't die, and they live up to being 188, and kids with a cold. I get there, and it's worse than I imagined. I have to rent this flat, which is mostly the first floor of an old building in the central plaza, the 4 square feet town center, and stinks of cigarettes and alcohol worse than I do. I have a roommate I barely see, and a landlord that instructed me from the beginning not to smoke. The hospital is 2 miles away, in what I like to call the suburbs of this mega-populated area. It's a rotting building with mold in like half of the rooms and a questionable basement, but at least the staff is nice. I don't know how they passed all safety and health checks, but fuck if I care. Anyway, I start and there's nothing unusual going on. I don't have much to do as I anticipated. Walk around, do checkups, draw blood, assist, talk to patients. How are you feeling, ma'am? And how often do you say that happens? All right, I'll see what I can do. I took some night shifts in the first weeks, but it was extremely boring and the mold was bad for my lungs, so I stopped. Nothing interesting happened during the first few weeks. It was truly just me and the cold mountains, a lone and mysterious wolf against this darkness we call life. I don't know what was going to kill me first, the mold or the boring routine. Sometime around 9 p.m., as I wanted to leave, one of the nurses approached me and asked whether I wanted to take an extra shift for the night. Before I opened my mouth to tell her kindly to fuck off, she said something that stopped me. "We need help at the morgue." I paused, mouth open. I narrowed my eyes. "Who died?" She didn't answer. "People really die here? Wouldn't the population go down by like half?" She scoffed. "You should really take things more seriously." I accepted, just to break this endless cycle of waiting around. I was writing a report for an old lady, and she tried to make small talk. She looked at me, narrowed her eyes, and asked me where I was from. "Does it matter? I'm here now." "Of course it matters. You're transferred to the basement now? They must really like you." The old lady looked familiar, but I couldn't place her anywhere in my mind. She wore this flowery coat and had blue eyes that moved around a lot. I frowned. "Yeah? Yes. Tell me what you saw the next time we meet." Okay. Whatever that meant, I thought. The winter air was really getting to me, so I closed the window, then remembered the mold situation and opened it again. When I did, as the glass moved, I saw the old lady's reflection suddenly bending down and turning her head really quick. But when I turned to look, she was sitting in the same position, looking at me and smiling. I looked back at the window's reflection, and there she was, still bent down. I figured I must have been hallucinating due to the mold. The high pay was beginning to matter less and less. Lights flickering, the air got considerably colder as I got to the basement. It looked depressing, and the hallways were really narrow, with yellow walls and creaking doors. For the first time, I missed the familiarity of my tiny flat. There was one doctor there, bent down over something. Hi, you're Mr. Lake?" He didn't answer. He was humming something. I noticed he had his stethoscope on, so I patted him on the shoulder. He didn't flinch, just calmly turned around and looked at me. I saw a dead squirrel behind him, the subject of his examination. "I was listening to some tunes. Hi?" "Inside. The squirrel?" "Yeah, you get it." I stared at him puzzled as he stumbled to a drawer and pulled out something. "You must be Mr. Hannigan. Sign." "Is this an NDA?" "Don't worry about it." I actually will worry about it. I'm not signing this. What's going on?" He paused and remained like that for a while. I could hear the creaking floors in the hallway. "Is there someone else with us?" "Well, yeah. You'd think we were alone here. Who in their right mind would be alone here?" He laughed. I frowned. "We're together. We're not exactly alone." "God, you're still talking. Be quiet, Mr. Hannigan. Sign this and be quiet." I don't know why, but I did. Dr. Lake went into the hallway and I heard some whispering, then he came back. "Okay, they'll bring them in very, very soon." "Them? There's more?" "Yeah, we die in pairs around here." "Right." That was the least weird thing I'd heard tonight. I didn't even question it that much. We sat next to each other in the cold room for a while, and nothing happened. Just waiting in the silence, disrupted by one ticking clock and the wind moving the branches outside. As much as I was freaked out, it was interesting. I was a bit curious to see what was going to happen next, and judging by the non-disclosure agreement I had to sign, the night was not going to be uneventful. "Is your name really Dr. Lake?" I asked. The man flashed me a smile. "It used to be Blake, but I gave a letter up." Then, right as he looked up to the door frame, his expression dropped. I turned to look, but nothing was there. "They're here," he mumbled, half excited, half nervous, as he sprinted through the door. I followed, and to my surprise, someone was really there. A nurse wearing 3 crosses around her neck, bringing 2 bodies on 2 distinct tables. When she saw us, she nodded. Her face was made only from sharp angles and rough tones, and her eyes had no warmth, no movement, even when she looked at me. Her lips were paper-thin and violet, and her hands covered in cuts. She didn't speak, but Dr. Lake thanked her, and we pulled the 2 tables inside the room. The post-mortem room was cold and sterile, its metallic surfaces gleaming under the harsh, clinical lighting that cast sharp shadows across the space. In the center of the room, the 2 stainless steel tables stood like grim altars, each one slightly angled with drainage channels for fluids. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, a sharp contrast to the heavy silence that seemed to settle over everything. Along the walls, cabinets held an array of gleaming surgical tools, scalpels, bone saws, forceps, all meticulously arranged for easy access. A ventilation system hummed quietly, ensuring the air remained cool and sterile, while a sink in the corner provided a steady trickle of water, the sound a soft but constant reminder of the room's grim purpose. Yeah, air ventilation. Good luck beating the mold. I thought, but noticed that this room seemed to be free of mold. It was almost as if it didn't belong to the hospital. "Mr. Hannigan, I need you to take out a notebook and write down what I tell you." I obliged, expecting instructions, initial observations, or anything like that. "Right. Rule 1. Rule 1. Don't talk to strangers." I smiled at the joke, then hovered my pen above the paper, waiting for the actual rule. "You done?" I looked up, still expecting. Dr. Lake was studying me, impatient. "Rule 2. Wait, Rule 1 was, don't talk to strangers. Come on, hurry. We have to be done before the sun rises." "What do you mean?" "I'm sorry, was that a joke?" "I am dead serious. In this, area, you don't talk to no one. Just me or anyone you know. You see others working in the basement, you do not approach them. You don't talk to strangers." I pressed my pen into the paper and distantly wrote, "Don't talk to strangers." Rule 2. Always examine everything around. A death is not just the end of a life. It is a separation that bends the universe and snaps it in half. Such thing disrupts the atmosphere, so be mindful of your surroundings. Sometimes the clues are not in the dead body, but everything else around them. Great, I thought. This doctor was fucking crazy. Maybe that's why no one wanted to work with him. Rule 3. Look in the mirror often. It helps you be grounded. Rule 4. Don't look at the blood too much. Rule 5. No, their eyes don't follow you around. You're imagining things. Even if it feels real, don't panic. They can't judge you. Rule 6. Don't look at the photographs before you finish. Just take them and let them develop. By the time you have your verdict, write it on the back of the photographs and let them listen. Rule 7. When you're done, thank them, but don't fully close the door. They need to leave. Get out of the basement quick before they get the chance to follow you home. I was insanely freaked out by the time Lake finished dictating, and he must have noticed, because he laughed. "Don't worry, Mr. Hannigan, I am a professional at this. God, you should see your eyes. They just keep darting to the door, like you're debating whether to make a run for it or not. Trust me, nothing will happen to you. Nothing. I feel like I should at least know what they're for, Doctor, just so I know how to behave." For a moment, he stared at me fully expressionless. Then his eyes drifted to a fixed point in space, and he tilted his head. Yeah, all right. But I'll make it quick. We really need to get to work." I nodded. "Remember you signed the NDA?" "Yes. That implies no words to anyone. Mom, girlfriend, sister." "Yes, sir." "All right." His eyes were glistening. "They should have told you more. I don't know why they didn't. So, have you ever heard of a purgatory?" Purgatory, in religious and spiritual contexts, particularly in Roman Catholic theology, is a state or place of purification or temporary punishment where souls of those who have died in a state of grace undergo purification to achieve the holiness necessary to enter heaven. It's not a place of eternal damnation like hell, but rather a transitional state for those who are not yet ready to stand in the presence of God. I nodded, and somehow in the silence of the room, in the cold company of the 2 sheet-covered bodies, it felt like I wasn't the only one listening. In a broader non-religious sense, purgatory can refer to any kind of liminal, in-between state of suffering or waiting, where someone endures hardship without yet reaching a final resolution or outcome. There are numerous energetic points on Earth where the fabric of our telluric plane shifts and gathers, and cumulations of energy do happen. Those places become heavy and very important to the passing of souls. His eyes were locked on mine. Listen, Hardin, I hadn't expected him to say my name. This is one of them. I opened my mouth to speak, but he motioned at me to shut up. This village is built specifically for these. Long ago, way before history got its name, our people realized that. Right when we came to know what a ghost is, and when we tried to communicate with them, we found out. Purgatories happen on Earth because the spirit is still very human and tied to its body. This hospital is specialized in this. In the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw the white sheet softly lift and come back down, as if the thing behind it was breathing. When you say specialized, he cleared his voice. You felt it. Look at me. I did, and his playful allure had dropped. He was focused and sober. Hardin, you've worked with them. No. This hospital is not your usual one. How did you find out about this job? It couldn't be. Through a friend. Do you remember their face? No. Exactly. There's a reason why the mold doesn't affect the patients. They're already dead, waiting. Only, they don't fully know they're dead. That's why we hold them down with fake examinations until their time to get judged comes. Down here. But why us? You mean you don't do their autopsies? To find out how they died? No. I do the autopsy to determine whether they deserve to go to heaven or hell. That's the real examination. And what's my purpose here? Nothing. I just need your intuition. I blinked, confused. Just watch me work, Lake added, putting his gloves on. And then he began. Pulling the first sheet, I recognized the blue eyes and prominent neck veins from earlier. It was the woman I talked to that night. I did what he asked me to. I handed him different utensils, some which I recognized, others strange. A glass ball, holy water, a pair of glasses, a deck of cards, salt, sage. I noted down his observations. Upon examination of the heart, significant coronary artery disease was noted. Patient had driven one of her past lovers to a suicide attempt, then refused to take the blame for it. The left anterior descending artery was found to be approximately 90% occluded by atherosclerotic plaque. Patient knew a family friend abused by their kind but said nothing. The notes kept going, and all I did was stand and write. He took some pictures for the file. Then, after 2 hours, he declared he'd finished and started putting her back together. You have your verdict? I asked. Yes, I do. That's when you come in. I have concluded the theoretical research. I need you, because you don't have any knowledge in this field and are objective, to use this stethoscope and listen to her chest. Hear her song and tell me what it is. That's how she presents herself to others, and I need it to conclude my research. Hesitant, I put the stethoscope on and placed it on the woman's chest. I hear nothing. Wait, I did. At first she was silent. I imagined her chest drained of life and the air flowing inside, then thought of the impossibility of me ever hearing something. Maybe this is really crazy, I thought. I was waiting for someone to jump from behind with a camera and tell me I've been pranked and that I'll see myself on TV soon. Then along came a hush. At first I thought I imagined it. My shoulders and back were tensed up and sweating. Then I heard a snap, followed by others. A rhythm. I hear a rhythm, sir, doctor. Play it to me. I snapped my fingers the way I'd heard, and Lake wrote something down, then took one of the photographs and wrote in caps, hell, on the back of it. He folded the photograph without looking at it and put it in an envelope. One done, one to go. I was about to lift the end of the stethoscope when I heard it loud and clear, coming from the depth of the woman's chest. My eyes widened. The voice had spoken very clearly to me. Dr. Lake saw my reaction and asked me whether I had heard something else. No, it's just, I still need to get used to this, right? Can I go to the bathroom? Lake raised his eyebrows. We really don't have much time. You can go after. I really need to go now. I saw it down the hall. I'll be quick, I promise. He sighed. Fine. I nodded, then turned and left, closing the door behind me. I could have left it open, but I didn't. This way, if he came after me, I'd hear. I got inside the stall and did my thing, then stopped. The hallway was silent, and so was the restroom. I struggled to hear any footsteps. I waited. There was no window I could go through. We were in the basement. Then I heard the click of the door. Pardon? Yeah, just a moment. I'm inside. I just need to puke. It's been too much for me. Okay, I'll wait for you here. I really can't puke with others listening. It feels weird. I heard a sigh. I'll be at the end of the hallway, waiting for you. Okay. I waited until his footsteps reached the end of the hallway, then for another minute. I got out and turned the tap on for a while, thinking. The stairs were halfway to the morgue. I could make a run for it, but I didn't know how fast he was. If he could catch me. I needed to walk slowly until I'd reach the stairs, then run upstairs. Out of the hospital, into the night. Start my car and drive. Drive. I took the plunger and hid it behind me, just in case, then opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Lake's silhouette was at the end of it, waiting. I walked, slowly, one foot in front of the other. He came closer too. Fuck, say something. Talk to him. God, I thought my stomach was stronger than that. I'm so sorry, it's so embarrassing. It's fine. When I reached the stairs, he'd come closer. In a second, I bolted upwards, skipping steps, fully conscious he was behind me. Fear had emptied my guts, and my heart beat in a rhythm I hadn't ever known. My mouth dry, I reached the ground floor, only to find it empty. The lights were off, and no one was around. The silence was grim and deeply disturbed me. No patients, no doctors. I turned, face to face with Lake. Come back. It's not that easy to go. In a moment, I heard a crack and a thud, and realized my hand had produced it. I hit him in the head with the plunger, driven by desperation and horror, and now Lake was laying down, his head crowned by a crimson halo of blood that began to spread across the floor. Blind by fear, my heart going crazy and palms sweaty, I pushed the entrance doors wide open, then looked back only once before hitting the gas. I saw Dr. Lake's dead, wheezing body on the floor, and someone, or something, going up the stairs, even if I knew no one else was in the basement. That was enough for me. As I drove away, dozens of silhouettes watched me from the windows of the hospital. I got to my flat and started packing my bags. The words I'd heard inside the woman echoed through my mind. A final warning, a final message. They'll kill you after he's done with the second body and bring in another young resident the next day. They just use your innocence. My roommate cursed me for turning on the lights and making so much noise in the middle of the night. I wondered how much he knew about this place. As I slammed the door behind me, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen now after I'd found out everything and spoken about it. Dr. Lake's dead body remained imprinted in my mind along with his words, which still haunt me hours after everything happened at the diner I've stopped at to write this. We die in pairs around here. If that made your heart race, then brace yourself for what's coming next. Something horrifying lives in the Salton Sea. Okay, so I'm not sure if any of you here have heard anything about this, but to be completely honest, the people who live around the lake here, myself included, are beyond terrified, even if we don't say it outright. It's not a new occurrence. Stories about it have circulated at least since I was a small boy, and according to the old-timers who still remain, perhaps even longer. But the last year or so, and especially the last 6 months, it's really gotten bad. For anyone unfamiliar with the area, and contrary to its name, the Salton Sea isn't an actual ocean, but a large saltwater lake located in Southern California. Millions of years ago, there used to periodically be a giant lake here which would swallow the whole valley up, but the Salton Sea, as it's known today, was created by a dam bursting on the Colorado River over a century ago. It once was touted as a miracle in the desert, and attracted tourists and vacationers from everywhere to swim, boat, and fish in its waters. But thanks to a number of disasters, both natural and man-made, by the 70s and 80s, it had been reduced to a shell of its former self. Only those too stubborn or too sentimental to leave remained, and in the following decades, other people soon came to live on the shores of the lake. Those who saw it as an artistic refuge from the outside world, or those who weren't in the best financial situation. Nowadays, its biggest claims to fame are an early 2000s movie starring Val Kilmer, and having a fictional version of it in a very famous video game. Like I said, though, if you ask the real old-timers, the few who still live here, who were around during the sea's glory days, They'll tell you that it's always been here, living beneath the water's surface. Nobody ever bothered to give it a name. In those days, the year-round residents feared that word might get around and scare away the tourists. They couldn't risk the lifeblood of the 5 towns that rest on both sides of the lake disappearing into the ether. And so, whenever somebody went missing, be it a tourist who just so happened to never come up after diving under the water, or whose empty boat was found floating abandoned far from shore, a fishing rod still in the holder and a smear of blood on the gunwale, they would cover it up. Eventually, they would all end up as files in the unsolved cold cases department of the police station. And since the disappearances were seldom, birds seemed to what disappeared the majority of the time, nobody outside of the community ever bothered to dig deeper. As I was born decades later, I didn't hear about it until I was a little kid, growing up in what was left of Bombay Beach in the early 90s. It was a stern warning my mother and father always told me. Now you get your behind back here before dark, Jim, and stay away from the water's edge on your way home. When I asked them why, they refused to say anymore, only remained adamant for me to stay away. Naturally, as I was a rebellious 10-year-old boy, the first chance I ever got, I ignored their rules and stood by the water's edge as the sun lowered on the horizon. That was the first time I ever saw it. I had been watching a heron fly over the water's edge when my attention was caught by a ripple about 20 feet from shore. At first, I thought it was just one of the last remaining fish still in the lake, or more likely a trick of the fading light. But when it came again, closer this time, I focused completely on it. A third ripple, this time more violent, came from less than 15 feet from where I stood. And almost like precognition, I suddenly felt an almost sickening sense of dread and terror overtake me. Goosebumps rose on my arms, and even in the sweltering heat, I felt a chill shudder through me. I began backing away from the lapping water, feeling very much like the worm on the end of a hook that has just seen the fish, which will end its existence, approach. And then its head broke the water's surface. In the last rays of sunlight that preceded the beginning of night, I couldn't make out its features that well, but if you want a general idea of what it looked like, take the monsters from The Creature from the Black Lagoon and humanoids from the Deep movies, splice them together, and then imagine that hell itself took a few extra minutes' effort and spat out the amalgamation. The biggest thing I can remember was its eyes. 2 glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce right into your very soul, attempting to root you to the spot and unable to flee. I felt myself begin to tremble as I watched it study me, the same way a shark eyes a young seal pup. And had it not been for what happened next, I doubt I would be here today. As I watched it begin to stand up, still unable to move, the sudden loud explosion of what I can only assume was a firework of some sort, likely set off by one of the bored and rowdy teens that lived a little ways down from me, pierced the air. The sound froze the creature in place, and I saw its head swivel around to try and locate its source. At the same time, it finally seemed to break the spell, and without another look to see what it was doing, I turned and ran towards home, screaming. When I burst through the front door, I saw my mother and father spin around to face me. I saw my mother's face go pale as she saw the terrified expression on my face, and my father was a blur of motion in an instant, sprinting past me to lock the door and slam the windows shut. Mom knelt down beside me, wrapping me in the tightest hug she ever gave me. I could feel the hot tears dripping down onto my cheek. I never again disobeyed my parents. As the years went by and the dawn of the new millennium rounded the corner, the stories of it kept making the rounds around us locals. After my 21st birthday, I would hear them the most in the Ski Inn, one of the 2 bars in town, spoken in hushed, drunken whispers so as not to attract the attention of the occasional out-of-towner who happened to wander in. My father died of cancer in 2004, and my mother, seeming to give up on life without him by her side, went just 4 years later. For a time, I seriously thought about selling our home and simply moving somewhere else. Between what my parents had left me and the money I made working construction on a casino that had recently opened nearby, I had enough to take my belongings and start anew somewhere else. Somewhere where there was less crime, less dead fish, and most importantly, without the looming specter that dwelled below the surface. But whether it was a stupid sense of loyalty to the memories that lingered in the house, fear of leaving the only place I'd ever known, or even defiance, a refusal to allow it to make me turn tail and run, I stayed. Just like the old-timers and the others who slowly moved in to take their place when they died, and things continued on as normal as they could. Until rather recently, that is. You see, without the Colorado River replenishing it, and with farmers conserving more water, not allowing it to run off like before, the Salton Sea is beginning to shrink. Slowly, but steadily. There are efforts to try and save it, if nothing else, but for the birds which still live on its shores, and to keep the toxic dust clouds from filtering up from the bottom of the lake, from blowing over the towns and into the nearby cities like Los Angeles. But it hasn't stopped it completely, and that seems to have made the creature far more aggressive. The last couple of years, the rate of people disappearing around the sea has increased exponentially. What once used to be only 1 or 2 every 5 or 6 years has multiplied exponentially. They're never dug into too deeply, as many decades ago before. After all, with the reputation the area has, most assume that they were victims of either drug violence or robberies gone wrong, and they were buried somewhere out in the desert. Things like gunshots are ignored by people out here at this point. As much as we wish we could get help, everyone here knows that nobody would believe any of us. It would be written off as the hallucinations of a drug addict or alcoholic, or simply the fantasies of someone with too much free time on their hands. And because it was hushed up for so long, as horrible as I know it is to say, many simply find it easier to continue the cycle than to break it. The same way some towns never spoke up when cults moved into them. But I can no longer keep quiet. Not after what happened to old Fred. Old Fred was a vagrant, albeit a friendly and polite one, who wandered around the Salton Sea for as long as I can remember. He was in his 70s at least, with white hair that stuck out like Doc Brown's from Back to the Future, and eyes that held the same wildness as a Mustang. Every few months, I'd see him roll into town on his usual circular path. Usually, he would find one of the abandoned buildings to hole up in for the night. I never asked him if he'd heard the stories or seen the creature himself. I can only assume he did. That's why, one extremely hot summer night, a few months ago, as I lay in bed with the fan on full blast, trying to wrestle sleep from the grasp of the Sandman, I sat bolt upright as I heard his drunken shouts coming from outside. I couldn't be sure, but from the sounds of things, he was down near the far end of town, down near the water. "Oh, you've got to be shitting me," I hissed, throwing the covers off me and leaping out of bed as the realization slammed home. I felt the same fear that I had as a child rear its head at me, like a monster from under the bed, but I forced it away as I yanked on my jeans and a shirt. "Fred, you seriously should know better than this, drunk or not," I whispered to myself as I jammed my work boots on. Reaching under the bed, I pulled my keys from my belt as I pulled a lockbox out. Not long after my mother had died, I had bought myself a revolver. It was partly for protection in case some fried-out whack job tried breaking in, and partly as an insurance policy in case I ever found myself face-to-face with it again. Pulling the gun from the lockbox, I quickly 6 rounds from an ammo box into the gun. I shoved at least a dozen more into my pants pockets and jammed the revolver into my waistband. Snatching a flashlight off the kitchen counter, I slid the deadbolt back on the front door. I felt my heart thundering in my chest, and for a moment the temptation to simply lock the door again and ignore everything overwhelmed me. I took a deep breath and turned the handle, stepping out into the night. The stench of the lake hit my nostrils as I descended the stairs, and, moving as quietly as I could, I headed across the street and down the block. There were no cars on the roads, and as far as I could tell, nobody else awake. Aside from the hum of the occasional streetlight I sprinted under, the sound of a bird calling from somewhere far off, and the low but steady howl of the wind, it was silent. Silent, that is, except for the yells of Fred, who I was sure now was over the sand wall and down near the water's edge. "I swear I'm gonna wring your damn neck, old man." I hustled past the darkened shape of the old drive-in theater. my footsteps now in lockstep with my heartbeat. Each step I took towards the increasing stench of the water intensified the childhood memory that kept replaying itself in the back of my mind. A minute or so later, and the last of the nearby buildings fell away behind me as I approached 5th Street. Stopping to catch my breath for a moment, I snapped on the flashlight and shone it around. The street was empty, as was the narrow dirt road that led over the dike to the water. I strained my ears to listen. For a moment, there was silence, and I hoped against hope that old Fred had grown enough common sense to move away from the lake while I'd been running. But any such notions were dashed as I heard the loudest shout yet come from the other side of the dike. I couldn't make any individual words out, but the voice was unmistakably his. I inhaled sharply through my nostrils. Thuck, 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 thuck. I practically spat the last swear out as my course was set for me. Feeling my mouth go as dry as cotton, I forced a shaky breath from between my lips and then jogged up the road to the top. There was no moon or stars out tonight, and it meant the sand and muck that led to the water's edge was cast in almost complete darkness. Forcing myself to stay calm, and with my eyes darting around every direction possible, I slowly descended the dirt path until I stood on level ground again. The stench was almost unbearable now, being so close, and I gagged for a moment before forcing the whisper out. "Fred?" Nobody answered. I forced myself to raise my voice slightly. "Fred?" I thought I heard the sound of shuffling feet for a moment. My free hand dropped to rest on the butt of the revolver. But again, aside from a slight increase in the howling wind, nothing. I raised my voice to a rough shout, a pang of irritation almost overwhelming the tension and fear coursing through my veins. "Fred, for fuck's sake, answer me, dumbass!" "Fuck you, prick." The slurred, raspy voice of a man who smoked one too many cigarettes in his life, on top of being plastered, came from in front and to the left. Jerking my flashlight up, I focused the beam, and breathed a sigh of relief as I saw the man stumbling about 50 feet away. With a slight increase in anxiety, I noticed he was almost walking directly in the water, but after a quick, cursory look around, felt a small sense of relief wash over me as I saw he looked to be fine. Letting the irritation finally win out, I began to stride towards him. "Fred, what the hell are you doing down here?" I growled at him. "You know better than to wander near the water at night just like the rest of us, especially drunk off your ass. If you fell in and passed out, you could drown." Fred snorted in a way that told me he didn't give a hoot. "I do what I fucking want, whippersnapper," he managed out, flipping me the bird. "And I don't want your damn pity." I felt my anger begin to rise, involuntarily snapping at him. "I'm not giving it, you dumb son of a bitch. I'm trying to make sure none of us have to fish your—" The words that had been bubbling to the surface died away in my throat as, for a moment, something behind him had been reflected in the beam of my flashlight. 2 yellow, glowing eyes. Instantly, the anger I felt evaporated like water meeting lava, replaced by a sudden, bone-chilling surge of pure terror as my breathing shallowed. The same goosebumps I'd felt that night so many years ago covered my arms, and I felt a gigantic shiver fly up my spine. Oh, fuck me sideways. My eyes snapped back towards the old man, who now was raising a dirty bottle to his lips to chug whatever booze he'd gotten. I spoke in a deadly serious voice. "Fred, you need to listen to me right now. I need you to come over here to me, away from the water." He snorted defiantly again, head still tilted back as he continued to drink, raising one hand to flip me off a second time. Behind him, I caught another flash of yellow, closer this time. I took a few steps towards him, allowing a pleading tone to creep into my voice. "Fred, you can do whatever you want the rest of the night. Hell, I'll get you some more alcohol if you want. But I need you to get the hell away from the water." The man yanked the bottle away from his mouth to glare at me. "I said I didn't want your pity, Jimbo. That includes buying me shit." I began to call again, but as I glanced behind him, anything I could possibly say fled from me as my heart stopped. Behind Fred, less than 10 feet away from him, the yellow eyes glowered at me. Rational thought left me, and I reached down, fumbling with the revolver as I fought to yank it from my pants. As I finally freed it, raising the barrel to the sky, I saw a look cross Fred's face. Half fear, half rage. He began to shake in anger. "What, you gonna fucking shoot me?" he bellowed out. For another moment, he stood there, breathing heavily as he glared at me. Then I saw his expression change, as he realized my eyes were no longer on him, but behind him instead. It was as if all the alcohol in his system escaped, allowing him a moment of clear thought. Time seemed to slow down, seconds becoming minutes in my mind. I saw his face fall as his eyes studied the horrified expression that had to be carved into my face. I saw the recognition as his own face went pale, and he slowly turned to look down and behind him at the creature which now had reached out to snatch his ankle in one black, scaly, clawed hand. What happened next happened in an instant. One moment, old Fred was standing up, his face beginning to turn back towards me. The next, he was torn off his feet, slamming face first into the muck. Then he began to flail around, sputtering out disgusting detritus as the creature attempted to drag him backwards into the water. For a moment, I felt rooted to the spot. Then I was charging towards him, raising the gun as it turned to look up at me. Its eyes met mine, and I swear, in that moment, even so many years later, it recognized me. I felt my blood turn to ice in my veins, but still I dashed forward, dropping the flashlight to the ground as I reached out and seized Fred's hand in mine. As I began to try and pull him more onto land, he suddenly let out a horrendous scream, one that shocked me in how high-pitched it was. Raising my eyes from his face, I saw why. The creature had increased its grip on his ankle, its claws digging into and puncturing the flesh. Blood streamed out from the wounds, and it began to yank him backwards. I didn't hesitate. I raised the gun and fired. It did nothing. I fired all 6 rounds straight into that thing's head and chest. Even all these months later, when I try to tell myself that I must have missed, I know better. I emptied that gun, a .44 Magnum at almost point-blank range. At that distance, missing is impossible, and yet it didn't even react to it. In fact, it seemed to sense that my move had temporarily shifted my focus away from holding on to Fred. And it capitalized on it. It gave the strongest yank yet on the old man's ankle. For a split second, I saw the horrified look on the Fred's face as he realized his fate. The next, he was gone. His hand was wrenched out of my grasp, and I tumbled onto my hands and knees in the muck as he was yanked into the water with a loud splash. For a split second, I knelt there, my mind unable to process what had just happened. Then I leapt up, snatching up the flashlight as I aimed the now empty revolver at the water. My breathing came in short, ragged gasps as my eyes darted around, looking for any trace of the man. My flashlight beam glinted off something red drifting in the water, and after a moment, I realized it was a small ribbon of blood. Aside from that, though, and the broken bottle which now spilled its contents onto the ground, it was as if he'd never even been there, as if he never even existed. I stood there for a moment longer, the incident replaying itself over and over in my mind as the horrifying implications of it being able to shrug off 6 .44 rounds slammed home. And then I saw something which made me turn and begin sprinting back towards the dike, towards the relative safety of my home. I saw the eyes reappear in the dark, coming back for me. I don't go near the water anymore. I'm too afraid now. And the stories I've now heard others saying, not just in Bombay Beach, but all around the Salton Sea, fill me with horror I never thought possible, because there are whispers now of it not just coming out of the water to stalk the shoreline anymore, but coming into the towns themselves. People claim to have seen and heard it stalking the streets, heard its inhuman calls piercing the night sky like a baseball through a window. And what's worse, I've heard them myself, coming from almost directly outside my house. Ever since it learned it's invulnerable to firearms, it's gotten bolder, much bolder. And I'm afraid that I'm the cause of that. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I'm close to finally throwing in the towel, just packing up my truck and running as far away as I can. But not without giving a warning first. You, reading this, you need to stay as far away from the Salton Sea as you possibly can. I don't care about what people try and tell you, about how great a place it is for vagabonds and free spirits, about how cool it is to explore the shorelines and see a bygone era in decline, and attend the small festivals that occasionally happen around it. It's not worth it anymore, because that thing that has lurked below the water for God only knows how long is out here. And whether solely because of my encounter with it that night, because of the shrinking water level that is erasing its habitat, or some combination of both, it has become a whole new sort of monster. And the only question I wonder, because of that, terrifies me. The question that makes me want to put as much distance between myself and it as possible. If it's like this now, what will it do if the lake dries up completely? You might want to leave the lights on for this next one. It's even more disturbing. The Phantom Massacres of 1832. Large crows spread their wings and span large across an empty sky before swooping down into the town, pecking away at the bodies of several families strewn savagely along the main street of Harlow. The words of law enforcement when writing about the incident. The worst in a series of strange massacres along the Texan-Arizona border with Mexico in 1832. 3 small towns, all horribly attacked by factions unknown over the course of 3 months. A sheriff, 2 deputies, and a small posse descended on the town of Harlow to find a slaughter. The town had a population of around 32, and all their bodies accounted for. Heads dashed against rocks, bodies posed and violated. The worst of which was a young man, impaled upwards by 4 long spears and placed in the center of town. Symbols were drawn in white paints and powders. Horrid, crude things depicting pale white figures with deformed faces. Strange jewelry that seemed pierced into their necks, their eyes red and the skin around them pulled back by metal. This was the first time evidence of the attackers was left. In the prior months, similar scenes were found without a trace of anyone or anything. One day these settlements were there, raising livestock, families, and then one day someone finds the aftermath. The first was a smaller, newly founded settlement. No name had even been given yet. They settled down by a riverbed, some miles from El Paso. About 3 families had found a prosperous clearing to build. A young man had been sent to arrange the transportation of lumber. He was the one who found them. After a day, he came riding over the ridge and saw flames. The tents and what little was built was decimated, the men, women, and children slain. Solid black, crude spears covered the grounds, dipped in oils and set ablaze, dozens raining down on them in what must have been the dead of night. Half of them were caught in their beds. The rest raced out and apparently tried to fight. None of them survived, and from the looks of it, their efforts were entirely fruitless. The young man was scarred, eventually taking his own life shortly after. The attack was instantly attributed to the natives, Apache specifically, who were in fact in an ongoing conflict with the settlers. Attacks were not typically so brutal, rarely were they done on innocents as well, but it was not unheard of, and there seemed to be no other explanation. The surrounding native tribes faced heavy persecution, and when a group was arrested for the crimes, another incident occurred. Plantation owners William and Sarah Shriver were found on their road, dead, and stretched out across an effigy. The slaves they owned had all but scattered into the plains. The only account we have of this situation comes from an unfortunate recaptured slave. Late at night, the property was awoken to all kinds of screams. Guards and workers alike descended onto the fields, where large stills of moonshine had apparently been soaked into the dirt, and suddenly fire engulfed the largest group of men the plantation could offer. They didn't stand a chance. Everyone began to scatter as unholy wails came from beyond the fence line, and then man-like figures covered in what appeared to be ash raced in from all angles. Naked and on all fours like a beast, they ran into the panicking crowds. The slave reported seeing a woman tackled with immense force and beaten ruthlessly by the thing's bare hands. The last thing he saw as everyone else sprinted for the hills were the flames spreading to the house and the family being dragged across it. In total, 16 dead. None were slaves. Law enforcement was at a loss now, and though there was no attempt to release the captured natives, it was clear this was not the Apache. Things went quiet for weeks, the horrors of what happened starting to sink in the back of people's minds, until Gertrude Smith came into a sheriff's office east of Tucson, Arizona. Nearly naked, covered in dried blood and wounds, tears rolling down her face. Delirious, she mumbled and shook until she could tell them the name of the town and where they were. The vultures and crows could be seen circling miles away. The town of Harlow, Arizona, stood at the base of a canyon The blood spilled on the dirt was visible from over a mile. The strong smell of the metal of blood and the rot of death was sent to us by a strong gust. The men recoiled. One refused to go on. When we walked through the defaced town sign, I nearly vomited. Bodies of men, women, and the young, defiled. Horrific drawings and symbols spread across the dirt and homes. God was looking elsewhere on this day. Sheriff Truman. This incident was special. Not only had this become the highest victim count, the attackers had finally left evidence of their existence, heavy evidence. After the bodies were gathered and loaded for burial, the town was taken apart and searched. No valuables were taken of any kind. No food, clothing, jewelry. But the details of the incident were incredibly recorded by young Gertrude herself, who cataloged what could be only described as an unholy multiple-day raid of these figures in her diary. The pieces here have been abridged from the original text, as no access to the diary pages are public. Pa came in concerned tonight. A man who my whole life has been so stern and stoic looked white as a ghost. He set me away, and of course I stayed behind the wall to listen. He and the boys were hunting on the ridge and saw something. Some strange animals, they thought, until they got closer. Saw it standing on its legs like a man, ghastly white and tall. From miles down the creek, he snapped a look at them and walked back into the brush. He angrily said something of the Apache, but he didn't seem so sure. Surely sleep won't come easy tonight. The sunset was a deep red. I was astonished by its beauty. The rolling clouds puffing in ephemeral astonishment, stretching wide across and complementing the equally red dirt of the desert plains. Pa is still filled with worry of what he saw, so the red sky seems like bad omens to him. But this reminds me of why we settled here, hoping for more to come. A day passed, seemingly without incident, except for another unusual blood-red sunset. Things ramped up quickly. Mary has gone missing. Her and Jeremiah snuck down to the creek together this morning. Nobody has heard anything since. Pa sent everyone inside. We are not to leave or be alone. He spent hours down in the valley, but they came back with nothing. Men are heading into town as soon as they can to fetch help. Things are concerning, to say the least. Mother has spent all day rocking in her chair with little Davy. She won't talk about any of it. Pa grows angry with any mention, and he has already broken into the stills. I'm left alone with these fears. There was never a report given regarding the disappearance of young Mary and Jeremiah with any law enforcement at any point. The men who went to report this were, in fact, never heard from again. The men have yet to return. Night is approaching, and they left yesterday afternoon. Even a leisure ride shouldn't have this much delay. That very night, the attacks began. They came in the night. I awoke to something rapping at my window, and I looked up in the candlelight to an unholy, swollen face. Ashen white, pressed against the glass, a vile smile with twisted fangs for teeth. I screamed. I screamed so loud the devil himself heard me. Pa was in the room in his shotgun in seconds, and he fired at it. The shot, the glass and wood breaking was too much. I ran so fast from my bed, I hit the wall head first. The face was gone, but we heard more screaming. Pa went to the window and screamed, "They're taking her," and ran outside. Mother and I looked out and saw two more of the wretched things, dragging away Theodore and Cindy by their heads into the brush. A small group chased them in. We heard the screams come and go for hours. Pa wants to leave. He needs to get the law. I don't want him to leave. I can't be here alone. Pa went to the road hours ago. Nothing yet. No screams. No howls. Clarence and his boys are sat on the roofs watching the trees with their rifles, but the sun is falling. The horizon's dragging it into void. The sudden redness of the sky and clouds is haunting. Screams again. The boys were watching from the roof all night, but they got in. Jeremiah was dragged into the bush. Ungodly, guttural noises came after. We all will be leaving in the morning. At first light, we take our chances. This had been the last entry. It would seem at first light something else arrived. Gertrude never spoke of what happened. In fact, she never spoke again. She lived with family in the north after, and they reported she lived in a solemn quiet for the remainder of her life. This was the last attack. Nothing of the sort was reported again. Search parties combed the canyons for days, but there was seemingly nothing. No signs of these figures, no tracks, no camps. On the final day, however, A group stumbled upon a large stretch of volcanic rocks and spotted a strange, unnatural structure at the base of a rock hill. They crossed the sharp, unforgiving rock landscape and found a large, petrified tree that had been expertly carved. Several black, human-like faces with mouths agape sticking out from all angles, described as twisted and demonic. The group destroyed it, chopping it into bits and leaving it to the wind. The search parties disbanded, and the site has remained unoccupied ever since. The story not widely reported and kept in the annals of history, referred to by the few who know as the Border Massacres of Texas, or more hauntingly, the Phantom Massacres. Critics refer to Gertrude's recollection of events as greatly exaggerated and seem to completely disregard the reports of the twisted effigy entirely. However, these same critics also commonly have a vested interest in keeping these incidents from the wider public, disregarding any connections between events. Like much from the past, and especially the dark past of early America, it will forever be shrouded in mystery, an inconclusive autopsy of a gruesome history. Thought the last one was bad? Wait until you hear what's lurking in the next story. I watch unsecured CCTV cameras on the dark web. Today, I paid the price. I apologize for any odd phrasing or typos. For the past couple of days, I've been having trouble eating, and I'm feeling pretty lightheaded. Sleep also hasn't come easy. Honestly, being behind a computer is probably the last place where I should be, but I need to get this off my chest before I can carry on with my life. We live in a time of constant distraction. Some spend their days with podcasts buzzing in their earbuds, some calm their minds with a constant stream of YouTube shorts, and others make ambiance for their apartment with quiet Netflix sitcoms. For the past couple of months, my choice of attention duller has been unsecured CCTV cameras. I'd eat my lunches to feeds from vape shops in Bangladesh or quiet intersections in Stockholm. Working home office has instilled a sense of gentle claustrophobia in me. The live feeds assured me that life existed beyond the 3 rooms of my apartment. For a long time, I found those assurances soothing, but then I found the warehouse cam. It was in an unsorted directory, and there were no identifying marks in the footage. I was looking at a feed from the side of some warehouse that bordered the edges of an industrial district. The camera was low, but the streets were empty. I had seen feeds like that before, yet what caught my eye was the gentle snowfall. Beyond the warehouse, there was a forest of pine trees. When I had started my lunch, they were their usual dark green. Yet, as I ate, and as the first snow of the season fell, the trees slowly turned heavy with white. The tranquil scene had kept me distracted from my thoughts as I ate, and I was getting ready to search for something new. But then I saw people. A procession, to be precise. At least 36 people dressed in lab coats walked down the road towards the forest in a single file line. They weren't dressed for the cold, and none of them seemed to be pleased with their journey. Yet, they walked without pause or stumble. I watched the camera long after the scientists had marched by, hoping for at least a hint of explanation, yet none came. The snow stopped falling, and the empty streets and forest became a near static image. I went back to work, but I did bookmark the camera address and took note of the time. The next day, as I took my lunch break, I caught the procession once more. They arrived at the same exact time as they did the day prior. More snow had fallen, and it covered much of the sidewalk. Yet the scientists moved no slower. With faces completely blank of expression and clothes not suited for the winter, the scientists marched through the snow and disappeared into the forest. On the 3rd day, when the snow turned to slush, they marched once more. The people in lab coats made the same trip at the same time every day of the week. Even during the weekend, when I didn't have to be behind my computer, I would attend our scheduled lunch appointment. Every day they walked by, and every day I was there to watch them. I found the mystery of the scientists exhilarating, and its regularity allowed it to be a constant in my days. Even when I wasn't on my lunch break, I would keep the camera feed running on the background of my browser in hopes of catching a passing car's license plate or anything else that would help me locate the feed. I wanted to know where the scientists were. I wanted to know who they were so that I could understand their daily march. Yet, no such opportunity presented itself. The nature of the camera feed remained a frustrating mystery. It irritated me. I wanted to know more about the scientists. I was naive back then. I did not realize the comfort that existed in my unknowing. 3 days ago, on my lunch break, I was once again counting down the minutes to the usual appearance of the scientists. I had gotten into the habit of only eating when they finally appeared on screen, and I was quite hungry that day. The moment I saw them, however, I lost my sense of appetite. They still marched through the snow of the sidewalk and mud of the forest trail. They still wore their lab coats, and they still moved in their orderly single file without pause, yet the scientists had changed. They were burnt. They were all horribly burnt. With some, the flesh had slipped off parts of their face and revealed the bone beneath. Others still had eyes and skin, yet the extent of the damage was undoubtedly fatal. None of them should have been capable of walking. None of them should have been alive. I watched my screen with utter shock and disgust. The innocent questions I had about the daily procession of scientists turned into sheer terror. My heart was seized with fear, and my stomach had been thoroughly robbed of all appetite, yet my mind still hungered for knowledge. Knowing that no one would believe me on my word alone, I decided to record the procession the next day. I had hoped that, perhaps, with video evidence of the scientists, someone would be able to see something I had missed. The next day, I attempted to record the procession, and it was a grave mistake. Over the months, I had gotten used to the unfriendly weather that would occasionally accompany the scientists, but when I tuned into the feed the following day, there was a snowstorm, the strength of which I had never witnessed before. The sidewalks were engulfed in snow, and the road itself seemed impossible to pass through by car. The weather was horrid, yet the line of burnt scientists still marched. They forced their way through the snow without rest or pause as they always did. That day, however, as the final scientist of the march passed the camera, they stopped. Their skin was too charred for me to get even an inkling of their identity, yet they clearly stopped and looked at the camera. Slowly, but clearly noticeable on my screen, the scientists shook their head. It was as if they knew I was watching them. Though I was in my warm apartment, looking at the snow-filled scene made me shiver. It wasn't until after the scientist had left, however, that I felt true fear. I do most of my work on the computer. I have not skimmed on making sure I have a strong rig. A simple screen recording is nothing my machine couldn't handle. Yet when I tried watching back the footage from the procession, the video was a complete slideshow. I had tried collecting evidence of the burnt scientists, but all I have is pixelated shots of a snowstorm. When I woke up the next morning, I was committed to making another attempt at capturing the procession. That, however, would not be possible. My internet access had been completely shut off. When I called my ISP to figure out what had happened, I was placed into a 2-hour waiting queue. When I finally managed to talk to a representative, they were cagey. Apparently, my internet had been shut off due to criminal use. Apparently, the police would contact me about the details. I write this post on my phone while sitting at a bistro. I do not know which law I have broken, and I trust the situation with the police will be quickly resolved. Yet I fear staying in my home. I fear that whoever is responsible for that procession of burnt scientists knows my IP address. I write this post on my phone while sitting in a bistro. This place used to be one of my favorite lunch spots whenever I wanted to treat myself and order in. I've never refused a burger from this place. It's the best in the city. I'm hungry and the air is filled with delightful smells, yet I can't bring myself to eat. I can't bring myself to eat. Because whenever I try, all I can think of is the burnt scientists. That was only the beginning. What's coming next is far more terrifying. I quit my job as a live-in nurse after only one night. The sound of police sirens wailed loudly inside the room, but he didn't move. To be honest, I'm not even sure he blinked. He just sat there as he had the entire room in his chair, surrounded by stacks of books, each collecting a thin layer of dust that had made its home on them. So, is there anything else I need to know? I asked curiously, staring at the man sitting in the chair. His eyes were droopy, almost as if he were asleep. His chair was wiry and uncombed, pointed in the air, and his almost white beard had little specks of drool. It was as if he were in a different world as I stood there in his little red and black checkered robe. No, He just sort of sits here all day watching police procedure shows, Bailey responded, parting her bangs with her hand. Her green eyes darted back over to him, as he still sat there staring through the TV. I could tell she was ready to get out of her green scrubs and pass over responsibilities to me. Let me show you where to sleep. He sure does have a lot of books, I added as we walked out the room, entering the hallway with dark blue walls, dark-colored floors leading to a row of open doors. Each room was similar to the one the man was in. Organized chaos, books on shelves, stacked on tables, the floors, and any other object that was available. Yeah, he was some sort of scholar, I think an archaeologist or something like that, Bailey replied, as we entered a room that had lime green walls, a queen-size bed, nicely made with dark gray sheets, and a slightly darker comforter, a relatively modern metal and wood nightstand sitting next to it, a small lamp resting on top of it. This is you. Should I try to pick up and straighten up the place? Bailey laughed. No, we're nurses, not maids. His son can pay for a cleaning service to deal with it. Gotcha, I said as I laid my backpack on the bed and retrieved my phone charger, plugging it into the wall. So, you said you already fed him his dinner, right? Bailey nodded. Yep, all you have to do is put him to bed, and to be honest, sometimes if he falls asleep in the chair, I just leave him. He seems to just like being there with his shows. What does he usually do for breakfast? I usually just cut up fruit with some yogurt. Seems easy enough. Yeah, I would just relax, catch up on reading or sleep, Bailey said, pulling out her phone and looking at the time. So do you think you need anything else? I don't think so, I answered, as Bailey headed back to the hallway. Her nose pointed to her phone as she texted furiously, and we walked towards the front door, passing the room with the man. Guns were firing on the television. It's an easy gig, Bailey remarked, as she pulled out a set of keys. They jingled her hand as she seemed restless to leave. So I will be back in a couple of days to take back over, but call me if you need anything. She hastily exited the front door. As I turned back walking to the room with the old man, the television was still blaring. I looked over to see his eyes were no longer drooped down, but were now fully closed. It looked like my night was going to be easier than I thought. I waited for a few moments before a dull snore came from the man. I debated whether to turn the television off, but decided to not bother before heading to my room quietly, shuffling to my room so as to not disturb him. The bed was actually more comfortable than I expected, as I began to scroll TikTok to relax. It groaned as my eyes began to open. I watched the door crack slightly. The room was now dark. I must have dozed off while on my phone. My eyes were blurry, but the sound continued as the door opened further. Hello? I asked quietly, debating whether it was an old house settling or someone like Bailey checking in on me. A light scraping noise came from somewhere I couldn't quite pinpoint. It was unsettling enough for me to reach to turn on the light. I sat up in bed to see something was out of place, but there was no one in the room with me, nor anything that could be making the scratching noise. I got out of bed and stuck my head out into the hallway. It was dark, except for the glow of the TV screen from the man earlier. I could hear a faint sound like people talking, as if he were deep asleep with the show still on. I closed the door and settled back into bed, turning off the light and beginning to drift off again when the door slowly opened once more. The creaking sound became louder as I heard the doorknob hit the wall. There he stood, the old man. His eyes were no longer closed or droopy, but open wide like a startled animal. He hunched over and slowly walked into the room with me, his hair still standing and his robe dragging on the floor. He looked around the room, his mouth agape, studying it from the floor to the walls and even the ceiling. I almost said something before I noticed something. He slowly crept around the room before turning his sights on me. He held something tightly gripped in his hand, which made every hair on my body stand up and tingle. I could only get a brief glimpse, but it was enough to scare the hell out of me. A knife in his hand. I don't know why I pretended to still be asleep, but he inched closer to me, his eyes and mouth still wide open as if he were walking like a zombie in the bedroom. He stopped at the foot of the bed, watching me as I pretended to sleep. I felt I was done for, but he just let out a strange chuckle before turning around and slowly shuffling out of the room. I laid there, my mind racing, as I searched my bed for my phone, quickly grabbing it in hand while getting out of the bed. I quietly walked to the door, sticking my head out once again. This time I was greeted with creaks and croaks from wooden floors along with the sound of television. He was walking around, but I couldn't see him. He was in one of the other rooms. Where though? I just knew I had to get out of the house as quickly as possible. I walked as lightly as I could. The sound of him walking was intentionally heavy and menacing wherever he was in the house. A few steps in, a loud sound came from underneath my feet. The hardwood floor had betrayed me with a light creak, but it might as well have been a scream. "You don't have to hide." A raspy, aged voice yelled as the footsteps picked up the pace, shuffling and dragging from somewhere nearby. I panicked as I pushed open another door in the hall and slipped in. "We can end this really quickly." The room was dark and musty. I could see the outline of a bed among more stacks of books. There were even books resting on the bed. It looked as if no one had used this room in years. "I'm going to find you," the voice shouted menacingly. The footsteps were coming closer. I had to hide as I looked around the room. Each piece of furniture, whether drawer, table, or even chair, had stacks of books upon it. I dashed towards the bed itself and crawled underneath, right before the door swung violently open. "Are you in here?" I held my breath, trying to hold back the urge to scream from the top of my lungs as I could hear him walk in. Each step he took, my heart felt like it would leap from my chest as he carefully walked around. "We are going to end this," the voice screeched. "I've been waiting for so long for the right moment to do this." He paused for a moment, staying stationary. I may have only been able to see his feet, but I knew he was looking. Not even a twitch came from me as I waited patiently, hoping he would give up in this room. After a few moments, he shuffled out of the room. I peeked out to see the door still open, but the old man was nowhere to be found. I was just going to have to run for it. As I slid from underneath the bed and darted towards the hallway, I looked around to hear the old man yelling somewhere in the house, "I know you are still here." I just ran towards the door, the television becoming louder as I came near the room where I had thought he had peacefully gone to sleep. As I got closer, I could see the light pour out into the hallway from the television, casting a shadow on the floor. He was in that room. I don't know why I stopped to take a glimpse, especially being so close to freedom. But I did, and saw a figure standing in the dark right in front of the television, as if he were watching a show again. "I'm leaving and calling the police," I yelled out, catching its attention. A strange hissing noise came from the direction as the figure began to contort, its head twisting around to reveal that it wasn't the old man. It was something else entirely. It started to move quickly. Each inch it got closer, sounding as if its bones were snapping. As it wobbled its way towards me, I noticed that its skin was a dark hue of green, and its mouth was covered in crooked and sharp teeth. But something was missing. It had no eyes, not even eye sockets. I started to move towards the front door again, but it moved faster than I could imagine. I felt wet limbs with a putrid smell grab onto me, tossing me down as if I were nothing more than a doll. "Get off me!" I screamed from the top of my lungs as the creature pinned me down and bit into the air with a frenzy. I kicked and squirmed, trying to free myself from it as its mouth started to move closer to my face. I closed my eyes. Then I felt something wet hit my face. "I've been waiting for you to show again," the raspy voice yelped as I opened my eyes to see a knife's blade coming from its face, oozing a dark blood as it dripped upon me. "Been a while, but I knew you would show up." The creature shook its head in a panic, releasing its grip from me as I crawled from its grasp. The old man took the knife out of the skull of whatever lay before me. He lifted the blade high above his head before striking down on the creature again, causing it to screech. He continued to do so, each sound coming from it becoming weaker and quieter, before it finally quit making a sound and lay lifeless on the hardwood floor. I wiped the dark, bloody substance from my face and looked at the man, struggling to stand and breathing heavily as I leaned against the wall. "What the hell was that?" I cried out. "That was called using bait. If you're still with us after that, the next story might just change your mind." Behind the curtain. I always considered myself lucky that my parents let me do whatever I wanted with my room. They thought it was important for my space to be mine. My only responsibility was to keep it somewhat organized. But if I wanted to draw on the walls, sure, go ahead. If I wanted to rearrange it every week, no problem. My dad was military, so we moved around a lot. I must have had dozens of rooms growing up, each one unique. Not all of them were to my liking, but my favorite was in an apartment above a restaurant. The room was massive, with a great view of the river and the restaurant patio. Best of all, there was a big walk-in closet. It was so big, I sometimes slept in there. It felt like my own secret hideout. Even now, I wish I had that room. I'd probably still sleep in the closet just for the nostalgia. My least favorite room, though, was in a farmhouse we rented in Nevada. It belonged to some weirdo landlord who always seemed too friendly. He had this big plastic smile, and he was thin in a sickly way, like Reverend Kane from Poltergeist 2. God, that guy freaked me out. But honestly, the landlord wasn't even the worst part about living there. The house itself was terrifying, on the verge of collapse. Holes in the ceiling, rats scurrying inside the walls, old water pipes groaning and clanking in the night. I wouldn't have been surprised if the rats were kicking up asbestos and poisoning us all. Oh, and bats. They'd fly out of the ceiling holes sometimes and terrorize us in the middle of the night. To this day, I'm still scared of bats. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the upstairs room. My room. It was small, barely big enough for my things. But my parents helped me make it work. There was a window with a view of the farm and the landlord's house. I had no desire to look at it, so I always kept the blinds shut. The room had one of those crawl spaces in the wall, the kind you open to access insulation or store things. I hated it. It reminded me of Coraline, a movie that terrified me as a kid. Even though I still love it, I couldn't shake the thought of some creature crawling out of that little door. My dad, sensing my unease, nailed a piece of wood over it and hung a black curtain to hide it from view. That was enough to ease my fears, at least for a while. One afternoon while my parents were out shopping, I was alone in the house. I stayed in my room, as the rest of the place always felt even creepier when I was by myself. I was sitting at my desk, drawing by the window, when I heard a faint scratching noise. I brushed it off as the usual rats in the walls, as I'd gotten used to hearing them scurrying about. But the sound persisted. It was rhythmic, deliberate, 3 quick scratches at a time. The more I ignored it, the louder it became. Annoyed, I turned down my CD player and yelled, "Hey, knock it off!" As soon as the words left my mouth, there was a loud bang, like something had slammed into the wall. The whole room shook. My heart leaped into my throat. I spun around in my chair, scanning the room. The sound seemed to have come from behind the curtain, the crawl space door. I stared at it, my skin crawling. Then the scratching started again, only this time it didn't stop. The sound grew louder, more frantic. I bolted out of the room and ran outside to sit on the porch. I didn't go back in until my parents returned. When they got home, I told them what had happened. To my relief, they said they'd already decided we were moving soon. The house was too unsafe to stay in much longer. For the last 2 weeks there, I refused to sleep in my room. I stayed with my parents, too scared to even go upstairs. On moving day, my dad took down the curtain and removed the wood that covered the crawlspace door. Before we left, I decided to take one last look. I don't know why. I guess part of me needed to see for myself that there was nothing to fear. I pulled open the door to the crawlspace. What I saw inside still haunts me to this day. Scratches. Dozens of deep, jagged scratches carved into the wood from the inside, like someone with only 3 fingernails had clawed at the door in desperation. And in the center of it all, crudely etched into the wood, were 3 chilling words. I see you. Think you've heard it all? The next story will make you question everything. I can't leave this horrible street. I know this is going to take a long time to explain. I'm not going to shorten it down or summarize it. Every detail needs to be said, even if this is the last thing I write. My name doesn't matter. I'd tell you which street I'm on if I even knew. I don't, though. It could be anywhere, and I've been driving so long that I don't even remember much on which street I was on. It's no use going back, I suppose. I've already tried that, multiple times. My texts and calls aren't going through, and even this is slow and laggy to type. I don't know what else to do, as I know I probably won't leave this road. But I'll tell you how it happened, or at least all I remember. My job is not desirable. It's just to get by, really. The night shift at the front desk of a motel. I have fellow coworkers, and I'm not scared of staying there at night. Plus, I enjoy the peace and quiet of the sleepy motel. Working with families complaining about too much noise in their room is the bad part. It happens too often. People mad at me for their neighbors. My job is what started all of this, really, if you think about it. I had a pounding headache as I drove the 25-minute drive to work. I wasn't paying full attention to the turns. It isn't exactly fun to have to be at work at 8 p.m. every night and then finally get home at 5 a.m. every night. That's why I figured I had a headache. Too much work, not enough sleep. I finally took a turn which set me off. I drove on for a while, car rattling and bumping on what I thought was What I thought was my familiar gravel road that meant I was getting close. I never saw anyone else on it, just thick, calming darkness all around my car. This road meant I was close and just in time. I pulled out my granola bar to nibble on to hopefully ward off the hunger for a while. Just as I was ripping the ticked green wrapper, something caught my eye. Just so everyone knows, the road is barely wide enough for two normal-sized cars side to side. It is a back road too, so usually no one walks or even drives on it. But things were different that day. There was a tiny body, one of a child, maybe, walking on the side of the road. It was kicking rocks as it went, little kid style, and swinging its short arms. This made me smile for a short second before feeling a bit uneasy. Why was a child out on a nearly deserted road in the middle of the dark? I slowed down a bit to look closer. Maybe this wasn't a child at all? Maybe I'd got it all wrong? No, this was clearly a little kid. Not only because of height, but the scrawny, awkward shape of kids. I don't know how to describe it, but that was clearly a child. I felt this sense of dread as the little child stopped, staring at my car. His eyes were barely visible, but his head was turned in a way it was apparent. Then he started walking up to my car while I was still moving. I quickly pulled over, feeling a strange sense of dread. The child stopped at my window, head down and shoulders sagging. He looked ashamed. "Mrs.," he murmurs quietly, "get off the road." I frowned, a bit surprised at the kid's bluntness. "I can't do that, buddy," I said slowly, not sure what else to do. "Are you all right?" I'm a bit socially awkward, so I talk slowly and strangely sometimes, saying words I don't mean. Talking to children is even worse because of their honesty and tantrums, but I can't just leave one in the dark. The kid looked up. His eyes were green and his hair was a curly black, matted into a rug on his tiny head. I nearly gasped at his bruised and dirt-encrusted face. His lips were dry, cracked, and bleeding with multiple sores. I couldn't believe the shape he was in. Dirty, bruised, and pale-looking. His lips opened, making a choking sound that turned into words. "No," the boy smiled a bit. He was missing multiple teeth, and the remaining ones were tainted a sickly yellow. I like my job. I couldn't even process the words. My throat was too dry to cough out even a few words, so I just stared. The disheveled boy's smile morphed into a toothy grin. I wanted to speed off, but couldn't. I was frozen, watching the boy. "Fine," he said cheerfully. "Keep going then." I couldn't just leave him here, right? He had to be in pain, at least a little. But I couldn't carry that boy in my car. My lips didn't let me say anything. My arms stayed as still as stone, not letting me open the door for the kid. I felt a feeling of dread, something not allowing me to let the dirty child in. So I didn't. I stiffly nodded and revved my engine. The kid backed off, grinning almost creepily. I wish I would have listened to the kid before speeding off into the night. I was speeding about 2 miles per hour over the speed limit. My phone ticked steadily over 8, so I was late. And though I was going fast, nothing changed. The forest around the gravel road stretched on infinitely, not thinning out at all. The turn I remembered being there was gone, and the fork that I knew should be there didn't come up. Maybe I'd gone the wrong way? I slowed down to only a few miles per hour and pulled up my phone. It opened to the password screen, which I briskly typed in, 816. I was very late. Quickly, I swiped to my home screen, a blurry picture of my rolling dog. It didn't make me smile like always. I swiped up again, opening my apps. My dog remained in the background of all the colorful icons. After scanning my screen for a moment, I found the multicolored icon of Google Maps. With one quick finger, I tapped it. Suddenly, my screen was engulfed in light, and I saw it. The normal screen showing the streets was gone. It was a gray line against the white background. My icon indicated I was traveling along the gray line, normal and shining blue. But there were no other streets around. Just this one, a straight line. It's hard to describe just seeing something so blank that is usually full. And to top it off, the street doesn't have a name marked across it, and it looks all too long. There are no destinations posted along it, making it seem eerie and outright scary. I gasped a little, looking up at the infinite stretch of gravel ahead of me. A shape cut through the darkness. Two small blobs of light accompanying a vaguely humanoid shape, except taller, with long and skinny legs and arms. It was clear it was looking at me, the blobs of light straight where a face would be. I let out a little squeal, turning around quickly. I don't know how long it's been. I've tried calling 911, but it's not going through. Texting just pops up a red text saying my message hasn't been sent. My phone time isn't moving, staying at 8:26 p.m. I'm not sure what to do. I'm terrified, seeing that thing everywhere I turn. It towers over the car, at least 8 feet tall. I need to stop. I feel weak, like I might vomit. I'm flying across the road, seeing that figure running with me. I think I might crash, but I'm trying to control the car. I've slowed as I'm typing this, trying to find a way out, but it just keeps going. I remember something else happened, but it feels like it's been days, yet it is still pitch dark. And every time I look, that thing is running closer and closer. If that gave you chills, the next one will freeze you in your tracks. If you see the swamp lights, run. King's Swamp is one of the most beautiful spots within a 40-minute drive from the city, from where I live. Photographers come from all around to make use of its breathtaking scenery, its naturally occurring light filters, the variety of wildflowers, and the various fauna that roam the area. For decades, ghost stories and urban legends have popped up surrounding the swamp, due mainly to the amount people who have gone missing and the odd swamp lights that visitors have reported seeing. People have even claimed to see the Phantom Lady roaming the swamplands. They tell various stories ranging from a woman who drowned in the swamp to a woman who committed suicide. What's odd about the reported lights, however, is that the swamp isn't really a swamp in the strictest sense of the word. There's a small connecting river that somewhat helps to circulate the water. If I remember correctly, I have read articles that the actual amount of methane in the water was low, making the existence of the lights all the more of a mystery. I was about to find out the reason for this mystery. I personally like the swamp because it's one of the few areas that's away from the light pollution, with a parking lot that stays open all night. I sometimes head out there near the foothills with my refractor telescope, my camera, and occasionally a tall boy to get some good shots of the night sky. This particular night, a buddy of mine had canceled plans that we had, so I decided to make one of my solo trips to the swamp parking lot. I was setting up my refractor telescope southward when I noticed some lights in the sky to the southeast. They were 3 green lights floating gracefully in slow movements. They seemed to be moving back and forth in a descending pattern. Nowadays, I would have thought that they were just drones, but this all happened sometimes before drones became a thing. They definitely weren't planes I've ever seen either. I come from a Navy town, so we were used to seeing various aircraft fairly regularly. I quickly grabbed my binoculars from my truck and tried to get a bead on them. It was hard to make them out. I did notice that their colors would change. They would go from green to red, then purple, and then blue. They soon disappeared behind the foothills. I contemplated what they possibly could be for a bit, while switching my focus back to fiddling with my telescope. Not long after, I noticed a glare of green light coming from in the swamp brush. Maybe it might have something to do with the lights that I saw, I thought. Maybe it was someone playing with some cool new radio-controlled plane, or a weather balloon experiment. I walked closer to get a better look, following the lights deep past the tree line and near the swamp. As I got closer, I saw a single figure in the distance, human-like, but wearing some sort of robe. Maybe what I was witnessing was ceremonial, or maybe I was about to come face to face with the infamous swamp ghost. I hid behind a tree and ducked behind some tall grass at the end of the swamp. I had thought that the figure must have been standing at the other bank of the swamp, but they seemed too close. Upon a better look, the figure looked to be a tall, slender bluish figure with a bulbous spade-shaped head or helmet, with a red mask with bright yellow eyes and long, lanky arms and fingers. I stood there crouched for some time, trying to figure out what it could be. Was I seeing the ghost woman of the swamp? It couldn't be. I've been up here quite a bit and never seen anything like it. It seemed to be hovering over the swamp, moseying about. I was awestruck. An instinctual fear told me that it would be better if I began to slowly head back to my truck. Another curious side told me that I should try to snap a picture. Even if I was able to manage it, it would probably be waved away as some elaborate hoax. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind raced with multiple ideas to try and rationalize it. My fear finally won out. I slowly backed away, making sure to keep my silhouette behind tree coverage. Then on the tree in front of me, I saw the reflection of more light, red this time, emanating from behind me. I turned around, and coming from down the path that led to my truck was another source of light. I quickly ducked behind the closest tree to my right and stayed quiet. I saw another being, similar to the one I had just seen, headed my way down the path from which I came. I was trapped. I continued to move right, keeping low and trying to use the tall swamp grass along the bank as cover. As I came around to another bend, I figured my best option was to wade through the swamp itself and make it to the trail on the other side. I turned around to see one of the lights headed my way. My fear of these things overrode any fear I may have had of any creepy crawlies lurking in the swamp itself, so I took my chances and waded in the murky waters. I pushed on as the swamp waters began to go deeper and deeper. At one point, it came up to my waist. I was surprised by how deep it was. I had thought these waters were shallow. The muddy bottom began to hinder my movement. Without looking back, I saw the light reflected off the trees in the swamp. It was on me. I had no idea if it had saw me and was pursuing me, but I couldn't stop to find out. I raced for the nearest tree in front of me on a patch of elevated land. I pulled myself up with the large protruding roots, and on the other side, where the roots formed something of a formation, which I ducked into. My heart was racing. I tried frantically to control my breathing as I saw the brush shadows shift with the approaching light source. It was on top of me now, standing above the large root system I was hiding under. I took a deep breath. I could hear it scavenging about just above me. Had it found me? I looked up only to see a tarantula. I held my scream as hard as I could. In an act of panic, I flicked the spider from the top and into the water. It made a small splash. The creature heard it. I saw a long arm reach over and pluck the tarantula from the water. There was silence for a long while, then the light began to fade away. It was moving away. I gave it a few more long minutes, then crawled out of my hiding spot and braved a peek over. I didn't see any more lights. They must have left, I hoped. I was cold and soaking wet now. I was unfamiliar with my surroundings. I looked around to try to get an idea of where I could be, to get my bearings. It was hard to figure out, as I only had the moonlight to go by at that point. I had a small flashlight on me, which I pulled out. Luckily, it still worked, despite being wet. I saw a little ahead. There was another trail. It must have been one of the trails on the far side of the swamplands. I trudged out of the swamp water and began to follow the trail, hoping that it would lead me back to the parking lot. I kept my flashlight low onto the pavement in case I saw any more creatures. I walked along for quite a while. Exactly how long, I'm not sure. I completely lost track of time. It was getting progressively colder and I began to shiver from the wet clothes. My eyes darted to every shadow, every branch that stuck out. I tried desperately to calm myself. I didn't see any more lights. I had hoped that whatever they were, they finally left. I still tried to keep control of my breathing. My anxiety was still heightened. I heard another noise off to my left. The hairs on my arms began to stand up this time. I slowly raised my flashlight. It was just more branches. No, I raised it higher. The mask. This was no tree. It was one of them. standing in complete darkness in the distance, watching me. I gasped. I began to run as fast as I could. I tripped over some cracked asphalt. I flailed for my flashlight. I grabbed it, pushed myself up, and continued running. I saw the parking lot off in the distance. I saw my truck. I would jump in my truck as quickly as I could and take off. The trees felt like they were closing in. I felt something grab my arm and yank me, almost knock me down. I turned. It was one of the creatures. It had caught me. My heart raced, stomach turned, then nothing. I woke up laying in the bed of my truck, still somewhat damp. I looked around. It was still dark. It must have been really late, though. I looked at my Nokia. It was almost 2. I had been out here a long time. I got in my truck, turned on the heater to warm me, and headed home. The next morning, I felt sore all over. I looked in the mirror and studied myself. Nothing seemed out of place. I didn't tell anyone, of course. I was still processing what happened myself and didn't think anyone would believe me. Then one day, I noticed it. There was something hard under my skin by my right wrist. I remember toying with it, thinking it was just a cyst or calcium deposit, until I remembered that night. They had put something there. You thought that was bad? The horror is only getting started with the next story. I think the scarecrow at my aunt and uncle's house is alive. The wind howled outside, making the walls of the old house groan. I sat by the window, staring out at the field where the scarecrow stood. It had been there since the day Olivia and I arrived, after everything fell apart, after our parents died. We were sent to live with Aunt Margaret and Uncle Bill, though they barely seemed to notice us. They stayed in their room most of the time, leaving Olivia and me to fend for ourselves in this creaky old house. And that scarecrow, it bothered me. Something about it wasn't right. Its burlap face and straw-stuffed arms were supposed to keep birds away, but it felt like it was watching us instead. Watching me. I leaned closer to the window, squinting. The scarecrow hadn't moved an inch since we got here, but every time I looked at it, a chill ran down my spine. Olivia always told me I was being silly, that it was just my imagination, but I knew better. "Why does it look like that?" I whispered to myself. "It's just a scarecrow, Grace," Olivia said from behind me, her voice steady, like she wasn't scared of anything. She always tried to stay brave for me. Nothing to be afraid of. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I couldn't look away from it. Its hat drooped over its face, like it was hiding something, and its arms stretched out like they could grab you if you got too close. As night fell, Olivia and I ate dinner in silence. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Bill hadn't come out all day. Their bed was made, but they were gone. I didn't like how the house felt without them. Cold, empty, too quiet. "They probably went into town," Olivia said, trying to keep things normal, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. She didn't know where they were either. After dinner, we went up to our room. I lay awake for what felt like hours, listening to the house creak around us. The darkness pressed in, and my mind kept drifting back to that scarecrow. I couldn't take it anymore. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the window. My heart pounded as I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. And that's when I saw it. The scarecrow was gone. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the yard trying to find it, but it wasn't in the field anymore. It was just gone. I ran to Olivia's bed, shaking her awake. "Liv, wake up," I hissed. "The scarecrow, it moved." Olivia groaned and rubbed her eyes, still half asleep. "What are you talking about?" I pulled her to the window, my hands shaking. "It's not in the field anymore. It's gone." She sighed, but when she looked outside, I could see her face change. The scarecrow was really gone. Olivia's expression hardened, and I could tell she was trying to stay calm, even though I knew she was scared too. "We have to lock the doors," she whispered. She grabbed my hand and we ran downstairs. My heart was racing as we checked the locks on the front door, then the back. Everything seemed fine until we reached the kitchen. The back door was open, and standing in the doorway was the scarecrow. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like jelly, and all I could do was stare. The scarecrow was right there. Its burlap face hung low, its hollow eyes staring at us. It held a large burlap sack in one hand, dragging it across the floor. The sound of the sack scraping against the wood made my skin crawl. I screamed. Olivia grabbed my arm. "Grace, run and hide." I didn't want to leave her, but I couldn't move. She pushed me toward the pantry, and I darted inside, closing the door just enough to see through the crack. Olivia stayed behind, facing the scarecrow. My heart pounded in my ears, and I could barely think. I wanted to cry, to scream again, but I had to stay quiet. I had to trust Olivia. "What do you want?" Olivia's voice trembled as she tried to keep her fear hidden. The scarecrow didn't answer. It didn't speak. It just moved, slowly, towards her. I couldn't look away. I wanted to run out and help her, but I couldn't move. The scarecrow raised its arms, and before I could even scream, it lunged at Olivia. "Grace, stay hidden," she yelled, just before it grabbed her. My heart broke. I couldn't help her. I watched as the scarecrow shoved her into the burlap sack. Her screams were muffled, her legs kicking, trying to fight. But the scarecrow didn't stop. It dragged her to the door, pulling her out of the house and into the night. And then it was gone. I don't know how long I stayed in that pantry, shaking, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My sister was gone, taken, and I didn't do anything to stop it. Finally, I crept out, my legs trembling beneath me. The house was too quiet. I felt sick. The back door was still open, the cold night air pouring in. I stepped outside, my body numb. The field stretched out before me, lit by the moon, and there, right in the middle, was the scarecrow. It was back in its usual spot, standing tall like it had never moved. But something was different. As I got closer, I noticed something hanging from the scarecrow's arm. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it was. Olivia's sweater. It was tied around the scarecrow's arm, fluttering in the wind. The scarecrow had taken her, and now it was her. If you thought that was unsettling, just wait until you hear what happens next. My fiancé and I saw a clown last night, and now things are getting weird in our small town. It was exactly 8 p.m. when the church bells rang. My fiancé, Summer, and I walked along the sidewalk bordering our apartment complex. The night's air was cool, but not overly so. The year's first snow was surely still beyond the horizon. Small piles of orange and browning leaves littered the sidewalk and filled a nearby ditch. We walked to the end of the sidewalk into the town square, a small thing with lots of ash trees and a tall white pergola sitting in the very middle. The square also housed a statue of Oakfield's founder and a monument dedicated to previous townsfolk who had served in World War II. If you hadn't guessed already, there wasn't much to Oakfield. The Combines kicking up a plume of dust in their wake was the biggest event going on at this time of year. "Watch out for our farmers," signs were posted everywhere. We arrived at the pergola and sat on its steps, craning our necks up toward the cloudless sky. Summer and I were the type to stay in after we both arrived home from work, opting for a good scary movie instead of messing around outside. Tonight, however, the northern lights were out in full force, casting a ghoulish green over the sky. If you looked closely enough, you could see streaks of velvet swimming in its swampish hue. "Can you see the red?" I asked. Pointing uselessly into the heavens above, "You gotta look deep into it." Summer had her phone out, snapping dozens of pictures of the dancing sky. "Check this out," she exclaimed, turning the phone towards me. The red hues in the sky were much more pronounced in the pictures she had taken. I studied the picture she'd taken. It was beautiful, showing all the shops and the square underneath a beautiful skyline. It looked like something you'd see on a postcard or a magazine. Before I returned my gaze to the stars, I noticed something odd in the picture she had taken. Between the cafe and the post office was a shadow, tall and slim, nearly imperceptible if you weren't looking directly at it. But the longer I looked at it, I could make out a pair of arms and legs and a masked face looking directly at the camera. I turned my eyes from the phone to that alleyway. My heart sank. A perfect light from a nearby post hung over the spot where the figure had stood, revealing nothing standing there at all. My anxiety must have been palpable as Summer prodded me about why I had become so quiet. After explaining what I had seen and having her examine the picture and the actual alleyway, I could sense a similar shift in her mood. "Yeah, that's kind of spooky," she finally said. "You want to head inside?" We took one last look at the sky and one last look at the empty alleyway before making the long walk back to our apartment. The shifting air felt particularly cold on that walk back. Every step sent a chill down my spine as the orange leaves shattered beneath our feet. We probably look like idiots, Summer laughed, pushing my shoulder lightly. I smiled, happy that she'd broken up the quiet tension which had built up. My eyes had adjusted to the outside, and everything around us didn't seem quite so dark, which also helped ease my anxiety. Rather than sinking this time, my heart practically fell out of my ass as we neared the front door of the complex. Walking along the sidewalk on the opposite side of the road was a tall, slim figure dressed in an odd outfit. Its eyes were glued to us. The man wore a straw hat, casting a shadow over his gaunt face. His face was smeared with paint that made him resemble something like a scarecrow. I'm not sure if it was just his costume, but I swear his eyes seemed to be as black as buttons. He wore a huge, tattered flannel that hung and fluttered in the wind. A similarly dirty pair of blue jeans hung loosely off him as well. As we stopped, only the sound of our panicked breaths breaking the silent autumn air, he did too, watching us, studying us. Finally, he raised a gloved hand and waved, continuing on his unknown journey. He whistled a disjointed tune with no particular rhythm as he continued along the sidewalk, before finally disappearing into another alleyway. We hurried up inside shortly thereafter. Sleep was elusive that night as we both tossed and turned, shooting up and looking into the dark hallway of our studio apartment anytime there was a noise. Even though we'd locked all the windows, I wasn't terribly confident in their ability to keep out an intruder. We rose early the next morning, both conveniently forgetting to bring up the weird shit we had seen the previous night. However, I noticed Summer had deleted all the pictures she'd taken from that night. Before work, we decided to get some breakfast at the local cafe, hoping that a little food would clear up any lasting illness that odd encounter had brought us. You know, Halloween's coming up. I began as we rounded the corner of the square and made our way towards the cafe. I'm sure it was just some weird dude trying to fuck with us. I finished, hardly satisfied with my half-assed explanation. Yeah, but it's not like it was a kid. Summer chewed at her nail, never making eye contact with me. That dude looked like he was 8 feet tall. A small group of townsfolk were gathered outside the cafe, gathered right in front of the alleyway between it and the post office. Some were trying to snap photos of whatever the police chief and various firemen were attempting to blockade, though the yellow ribbon dividing them seemed hardly capable. Some of the others seemed only to stare in disbelief. "Crime scene do not cross," the yellow tape prominently read. I swung my arm over Summer's shoulder and directed us into the cafe, trying to avoid whatever it was that had caused such a scene. Whatever hopes I'd had for a normal day were shattered quickly after Corey, the cook at the Uptown Cafe, came out to take our order. During my short time as a line cook at the cafe, I'd learned that Corey was never one to mince words. "You hear about that shit, Clay?" he asked, his usual stoner sunken eyes now as sharp as an eagle. I shook my head no. "Some sick bastard nailed a bunch of stray cats to the walls," he said, a slight grin turning his lips. "That ain't gonna be good for business." He pulled out a book of guest checks and waited for us to order as if we'd still be hungry. "What the hell do you mean?" I finally stammered out. He returned his gaze to me, looking at me as if I was dumb. "Well, it means he took some hammer and nails and created the Oakfield Louvre right in my alleyway," he replied sarcastically. "What are y'all having to eat?" he asked impatiently as the diner began filling with dazed-looking customers. "No, look, I mean, who did that shit?" I spat back, remembering why I quit working at the cafe in the first place. Corey stuck the pen behind his ear and sighed impatiently. "Ain't got any details yet, but apparently the guy wrote Corny the Clown in blood." He paused, seeming to decide whether or not to spill the rest of the details. Apparently the blood he used to write with wasn't from one of them strays either. What you just heard was only the beginning. Brace yourself for the next story. It has been 14 days since my little brother and his friends went missing. 14 days. It has been 14 days since my little brother and his friends were declared missing. 14 days since my family heard anything from Peter. He could be difficult, but he'd never just disappear like this. Peter and his 2 friends, Michael and Corey, fancied themselves urban explorers. They enjoyed creeping through crumbling malls and abandoned theaters that people whispered were haunted. The police had searched every likely spot within 100 miles and found nothing but old squatters and empty spaces. They shrugged it off, convinced Peter and his friends had taken off for spring break. But Peter's phone, always glued to his hand, had gone straight to voicemail. And it stayed that way. Frustrated with the lack of progress, I took a leave of absence from my job and returned to my hometown, determined to find Peter myself. The first place I went was our childhood home. It was early morning when I arrived, and the house was quiet, or so I thought. My parents were awake, moving through the house like ghosts, their eyes hollow and tired. They hadn't slept. How could they? Peter's room was a disaster, made worse by the police rummaging through it for clues. His computer sat untouched in the corner. When I turned it on, I was greeted by my first obstacle, a password. I tore through his desk, notebooks, and every scrap of paper I could find, desperate for a clue. A poster of some grungy tattooed band caught my eye, Vexor. Peter loved that band. I typed the name into the computer. Incorrect, it said, bouncing back. I sighed, leaning back in his chair, frustration bubbling up. The room felt suffocating, as if Peter's absence left a void I couldn't fill. Then I caught sight of the poster again, reflected in the mirror, backwards. Vexor read Roxev. It was a long shot, but I typed it in. The screen unlocked. I exhaled, a small victory in a sea of uncertainty. I clicked through his files until I found a chat between Peter, Michael, and Corey. One message stood out, a link to a YouTube channel called the Unexplained Adventurers Club. I clicked through their videos, which were well-edited shots of the three boys exploring decaying buildings and forgotten places. The latest video was of them at an old mill on the outskirts of town, and in the final minutes, they mentioned their next destination, St. Dismas Asylum. I Googled the asylum and immediately felt a chill. It was an old, abandoned place, shut down decades ago amid rumors of human experiments. The photos online were grainy, but enough to show a crumbling building shrouded in decay. The idea of Peter and his friends exploring that place made my stomach twist. Still, if that's where they'd gone, that's where I'd have to go. The drive to St. Dismas was long and oppressive. The sky darkened as I left the highway, and the back roads leading to the asylum were barely roads at all, mostly just dirt paths winding through thick woods that seemed to close in around me. The trees were lifeless, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. My headlights barely cut through the gloom, and with each mile, the silence grew heavier. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw it. St. Dismas sat perched on a hill, towering over everything like a malevolent giant. It looked wrong, almost as if it was leaning toward me, beckoning me closer. The building's jagged silhouette was barely visible against the night sky, but it exuded an aura of decay and abandonment. Yet, even from a distance, I felt eyes on me, like the asylum itself was watching. I should have stopped. I should have turned back. But as I neared the gate, I spotted a Jeep Grand Cherokee, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. My heart hammered in my chest. It was the same Jeep the boys had last been seen in. I pulled up alongside it and stepped out, the cold night air biting at my skin. My flashlight beam swept over the Jeep, and dread coiled in my stomach. 2 tires were flat as if they had driven over something sharp. My breath caught as I tried the doors, but they were locked tight. The back hatch gave way after a few tugs, and I climbed inside. The keys were still in the ignition, but the engine wouldn't turn. The battery was dead. I rummaged through the glove box and found the insurance papers. Michael Cromwell. I was right, it was their car. But where were they? I checked my phone again. No signal. Of course, I could go back, try to find service, but the thought of leaving them behind felt like abandoning them. I had to keep going. The gatehouse beside the fence had a faint glow coming from inside. I hesitated, then entered, my nerves frayed with every step. The light inside flickered, casting long, wavering shadows. An old computer sat in the corner, but it was the bright orange button on the wall that caught my eye. It had to be for the gate. With a deep breath, I pressed it. The gates groaned as they slowly creaked open, their rusted hinges screaming in the silence. I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the gaping entrance. There was no turning back now. I passed through the gates, and they slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the air like a final warning. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dry, brittle ground beneath my feet. The earth seemed dead, drained of life, much like the trees that stood sentinel around the asylum. In the distance, I spotted a single light in one of the upper windows. It shouldn't have been there. There was no reason for a place like this to still have power. I made my way to the front doors, their heavy oak frames bound with thick chains and a rusted padlock. I shook them, but they wouldn't budge. My flashlight beam flickered as I peered through the grimy windows. Inside, I could see the outline of an old waiting room, but there was no movement, no sign of life. I swept the light around, looking for a way in, but the shadows seemed to twist and dance just out of reach, taunting me. I figured there must be a similar orange button inside the lobby to open the front gate again. There had to be, or else I would be trapped here. Then I noticed the footprints, 3 sets, leading around the side of the building, directly under the window with the light. I followed them, my flashlight flickering as if struggling against the oppressive darkness. The prints led to a metal trellis climbing the side of the stone wall. Several bars were broken, and my heart raced as I realized this was how Peter and his friends had entered. I looked up at the window, the only sign of life in this dead place. I had no signal, no backup, and no way out until I found them. I took a deep breath, gripping the trellis. The metal flexed under my weight, but I climbed anyway, feeling the pull of something far darker than I'd expected waiting for me inside. Hand over hand, I went until my fingers scraped against the rough stone of the windowsill, and with a final heave, I pulled myself into the room, only to stumble and land hard on my chin, a cloud of dust erupting around me. Cursing under my breath, I rolled to my feet, the silence in the room heavy and oppressive, wrapping around me like a shroud. The administrative room was oddly preserved, an old bank teller's lamp casting a weak glow over a desk cluttered with disheveled papers. Despite the dust covering nearly everything, some sheets bore the official stamp of St. Dismas, their pages oddly missing a layer of dust, as though someone had been examining them recently. I rifled through the documents, noting the sterile language detailing procedures and consents that felt cold and clinical. A low hum pulsed in the air, reminiscent of faulty electrical wires crackling somewhere in the depths of the building. As I approached the door, a sudden crash echoed through the hallway, sharp and disorienting. My heart raced as panic surged within me. I was seconds away from bolting back through the window when I hesitated. Peter could be in danger. I couldn't abandon him, even if fear gnawed at my insides. That sound was heavy and metallic, but might have been the boys. What if they were trying to escape from somewhere? The thought froze me momentarily, but I steeled myself, pushed down the dread, and opened the door to the hallway. Peering into the murky darkness of St. Dismas, I aimed my flashlight into the gloom. A long, hospital-style corridor unfolded before me, lined with doors that whispered secrets. Some were slightly ajar, as if beckoning me closer, while others were locked tight, guarding their horrors. A crooked sign hung on the wall, the word Administration Wing scrawled in blood-red letters. I quickly checked my phone, praying for a signal, but the screen remained obstinately blank. With every step I took, the linoleum floor creaked, each echo amplifying my sense of vulnerability. Then I heard it. A faint dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled along the floor above me. My heart raced. Was it Peter? Or was it someone or something else lurking in the shadows? Perhaps a deranged ex-patient or a sadistic doctor conducting nightmarish experiments on the unwitting? A shiver danced down my spine. Calling out would be foolish. I needed to remain hidden, to find the source of the noise before it found me. At the end of the hallway, I rounded a corner and stepped into a grand atrium that soared up to what I guessed was the 4th or 5th floor. A secondary staircase spiraled down from the 2nd level, where another crooked sign announced, "Basement." From below, the low thrum of machinery struggled, a generator fighting to keep this forsaken place alive. I turned away from the darkness of the basement, drawn instead to the staircase leading up to where the earlier crash had sounded, and where my brother might still be. The elevator loomed beside the staircase as I ascended to the 3rd floor, its shaft a gaping, rusted wound in the building. The cage doors were twisted, and the cables creaked under the weight of time. I didn't need to be told that stepping inside would be a death sentence. At the top of the stairs, another crooked sign greeted me, reading, "Treatment." The air was different here. It was heavy and oppressive, like a smothering blanket. It felt as though the walls themselves were watching, warning me to turn back. Halfway down the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, light spilling out into the gloom. Something had been dragged across the floor. The linoleum was scarred with long, jagged marks, each one twisting like an omen of what lay ahead. My breath quickened as I moved toward the light, the ground shifting beneath me as if protesting my every step. The door groaned as I pushed it open, the sound an unwelcome intrusion in the silence. The room beyond was bathed in the cold, sterile light of ancient machines. Their blinking lights seemed too alive for a place so devoid of life. At the center of it all, sitting ominously in the middle of the room, was an old leather hospital chair. It was empty except for Peter's camera. I recognized it immediately. His name was etched into the bottom, a habit of his. My hands shook as I picked it up, the cold plastic sending a shiver down my spine. I turned it on. The footage was mundane at first. Peter and his friends driving up the hill to St. Dismas, laughing, joking. Then it cut to them climbing the trellis. It felt too familiar. The static that followed was jarring, but the next scene froze me in place. Peter, alone in a dark room, his face drawn tight with fear. "Don't let it touch you," he said in a shaky voice. A shadow shifted behind him, barely noticeable until it loomed, drawing closer. Peter shouted, then nothing. The screen flickered and static returned. A noise behind me shattered the trance. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy. Something was coming down the stairs from the 4th floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to the footfalls, each one reverberating through the floor. Whoever, or whatever it was, they were close. Too close. The light in the room was a beacon, a flashing sign that someone had been here. I cursed under my breath and moved to the door, peeking into the hall. The footsteps paused, the silence more terrifying than any sound. And then they resumed faster, closer. I darted into the hallway, my movements frantic as I spotted another open door across the hall. I slipped inside, turning off my flashlight and squeezing beneath an old gurney. The camera was still in my hand, its weight a reminder of why I was here. I pressed myself into the shadows, my breath shallow and uneven. The heavy footfalls reached the room I had just left. A crash followed, loud and violent, as if something or someone was tearing the place apart. A low, guttural growl pierced the air, feral and raw. My stomach twisted in fear, and I prayed the thing wouldn't find me. Suddenly, the light from across the hall went dark. I stifled a gasp as the footsteps returned, this time stopping just outside my hiding place. The door flew open with a loud bang, the force shaking the walls. A shadow loomed in the doorway. It was a hulking figure, its body too large, too monstrous. The thing wasn't human. Its head barely fit through the frame, and it had to stoop to look inside. Ragged, uneven breaths filled the room, accompanied by an unsettling, wet, sniffling sound, like its lungs were struggling to draw breath. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from screaming. My body trembled with fear, my limbs refusing to obey as I clutched the camera tighter, willing myself to become invisible. The creature moved deeper into the room, its bulk casting long shadows across the floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I could only watch, helpless, as it scoured the space. And then, just as suddenly, it turned away. The heavy steps shuffled back down the hallway, leaving the door wide open in its wake. The danger wasn't gone, but I had seconds. I had to move. With my legs trembling and sweat beading on my brow, I crept through the open door into the hallway, following the beast's trail. Keeping my flashlight off, I pressed my back to the wall and slid toward the staircase leading down to the 2nd floor. My goal was simple: to reach the open window I had entered through. Forget the security gate. I'd dig my way out if I had to. The lights flickered ominously as I made my way to the 2nd floor. Then, in an instant, they died, plunging the asylum into total darkness. A series of metallic clangs rang out, making me flinch. I barely had time to react before a security gate slammed down inches from my face, the force of it almost knocking me over. The gate's weight and speed were terrifying, nearly crushing me. Suddenly, a savage roar pierced the silence from above, rattling the very walls. I dropped into a crouch, whipping my flashlight toward the 3rd floor staircase. The pounding of fists on metal echoed down the stairwell, shaking me out of my hesitation. The beast was there, trapped behind another gate. I had no time. Without power, I couldn't get past this gate. Lifting it was futile, it barely budged an inch. The only option left was to descend into the basement and restart the generator. Another crash reverberated from above as I stared into the basement's black maw. My stomach turned with dread, but there was no choice. Step after step, I descended into the darkness. Each metal stair groaned under my weight, echoing in the silence. The basement was wet with filthy sludge from years of neglect coated the floor, soaking through my shoes as I splashed down the final steps. The steady drip of water echoed ominously from the far end of the hall. My flashlight illuminated the decrepit elevator at the bottom. It was a rusted, old-fashioned cage door, hung open like a trap waiting to snap shut. Ignoring it, I made my way past empty, forgotten rooms, their shelves filled with decaying medical equipment. At the hallway's end stood a large set of double doors. The generator had to be beyond them. The smell of diesel thickened the air, making me dizzy as I approached. Inside, my light revealed a row of hulking diesel generators, their orange paint peeling like dead skin. Wires sprawled across the floor like tangled vines. I scratched my head, unsure of how to get them running, when my flashlight caught sight of another video camera placed on a workbench. It was focused on the generators, left behind, just like the last one. The camera was dead, but I slid the SD card into Peter's camera. My heart raced as I hit play, hoping to understand what happened to the boys. The video flickered to life, showing Corey's face as he set up the camera in the corner. He stepped back, joining the others near the generator. "You see, guys? This old dinosaur runs off diesel. Help me roll one of those full barrels under the fuel line," Corey instructed, motioning to the red barrels on the side. The three boys grunted and strained, moving a barrel close to the pump. Corey switched the fuel line to the fresh barrel. "Now what?" Peter asked, clearly uneasy. "Now we crank it," Corey replied, pushing a large steel lever several times before slamming the red button. The generator roared to life, flooding the basement with harsh, flickering light. The boys cheered and high-fived, oblivious to what awaited them. I fast-forwarded through the rest of the video, seeing nothing new. The footage ended with the boys leaving the basement. They never came back for the camera. Pocketing the SD cards, I turned my attention to the generator. The barrel Corey set up was empty. I banged on it, the hollow sound confirming it was useless. After searching the room, I found only one barrel left with a fraction of its fuel remaining. Grunting, I heaved it over and swapped the fuel line. Sweat dripped down my neck as I pushed the crank lever, using all my strength. On the fifth push, I slammed the red button. The generator sputtered, then roared to life. The lights flickered on, and I heard the distant metallic groan of security gates rising. The beast was free. My heart pounded as I ran from the room, splashing through the filthy water. The wet muck coated me as I sprinted back toward the staircase, knowing I had mere moments. The beast had been stuck on the third floor, but now the gates were open. My footsteps splashed and squelched as I reached the base of the metal staircase, panic flooding me. And then I heard the sound I dreaded most. Heavy footsteps. The beast was coming. Its monstrous form barreled down the stairs, a screech tearing from its throat. I froze, terror rooting me in place. My beam of light fell on it. It was twisted, grotesque, more monstrous than I could have imagined. The stairs warped and twisted under its weight as it charged me, jaws gnashing, and I could only think of Peter's warning. "Don't let it touch you." At the last second, instinct took over. I dove into the open elevator, wrenching the rusted steel grate shut behind me. The beast slammed into the bars, its deformed face inches from mine. I fell back in horror, shining the light in its eyes. The thing's body was swollen and thick, its skin a sickly green. Its gut sagged, making it look almost comical, but there was nothing funny about its strength. Its eyes were blue and too human. They stared at me with a twisted intelligence. They were so similar to Peter's eyes. The realization hit me like a hammer, but I had no time to dwell on it. The creature roared, smashing its fists into the gate. I flinched as the rusted steel buckled slightly, struggling to contain its fury. Its flesh rippled and twisted, and I watched in horror as its right arm contorted, bones cracking and reshaping into a long, insect-like claw. I kicked the rusted elevator lever in desperation. It snapped off, but the gears groaned, and the elevator jolted upward. I heard the beast scream as its arm got caught in the metal, snapping with a sickening crunch. The thing collapsed to the floor below as the elevator rattled its way up. Shaking, I watched the basement disappear, leaving the monster and its terrifying form behind. But my relief was short-lived. The elevator was old, and the cable groaned in protest, straining under the weight. I felt every shudder in my bones. The lift creaked to a halt on the 4th floor, and I scrambled out the moment the gate clicked open. As I leaped out, I looked back down the shaft where the beast still lay, writhing in the dim light. I turned to the floor I now found myself on, and squinted at the crooked sign hanging in the dimly lit hallway. Laboratory, it read, the mockingly red letters glowing against the peeling paint. The flickering lights overhead cast eerie shadows, igniting a surge of doubt and fear within me. I needed to escape, but deep down, I knew the beast lurking in the depths of this place would cut me off before I could reach the 2nd floor. I could almost hear its heavy, deliberate steps echoing up the steel staircase from the basement, drawing closer with each heartbeat. My immediate goal was clear. I had to hit the button in the lobby and find a way to the 2nd floor window, my only potential escape route. This decrepit structure might be falling apart, but it was my only chance to get out alive. While I still had time, I decided to explore the mysteries hidden within these walls. The 4th floor of St. Dismas was a maze of confusion, featuring only 2 doors. One was caved in, remnants of a roof that had given way long ago. The other opened into an ancient laboratory, where large, sci-fi-looking machines crowded every available space. The lab was divided into sections filled with strange equipment and workstations, remnants of forgotten experiments. I trudged deeper into the room, searching for a suitable hiding spot as dread coiled in my stomach. In the far corner stood 2 of the weirdest machines I had ever seen. They resembled transporters from Star Trek, but with metallic tubes snaking around them, giving them a sinister aura. A series of dials and blinking lights covered their surfaces, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. On a nearby desk lay the last camera, smeared with sticky red blood and shattered beyond recognition. My hands trembled as I pried the SD card from the wreckage, inserting it into Peter's device. The camera flickered to life, revealing Michael's perspective. I fast-forwarded the footage to after we had been in the basement. The 3 boys appeared in the laboratory, their faces twisted with tension. They were arguing, and Peter looked particularly upset. "Come on, what's the big deal? It'll be great for views. I'll stand in this transporter thing, and you guys can flip some switches. It'll be a laugh," Corey insisted, excitement dancing in his eyes. "Who knows what it will do?" Peter replied, his voice a mix of concern and caution as Corey stepped into the chamber, shutting the metal door behind him. "Who cares, Peter? It's just old lab equipment." Michael shot back, his fingers already dancing over the buttons and switches on the control panel. "But what about?" Peter began, but before he could finish, a loud zap echoed through the lab, and a blinding light filled the camera's view, cutting him off. The footage froze for a moment, then cut out entirely. When the feed returned, the door to the machine stood ajar, and Michael knelt beside a lifeless form sprawled on the floor. "Corey, no, answer me!" Michael shouted, panic rising in his voice as Peter stood there, paralyzed in shock. As Michael reached out to touch Corey's body, something strange had happened. His hand seemed to become stuck. Confusion washed over him as he tried to pull away, but nothing happened. Horror crept in as he began to scream, slowly being dragged toward Corey, who lay still on the ground. Little mouths, grotesque and hungry, seemed to emerge, chewing at Michael's hand as Peter lunged forward, desperate to save his friend. But it was too late. Michael was soon consumed. The camera turned to static, the horrifying scene shifting to a large beast, forming on its knees, slowly morphing into a grotesque humanoid creature. In the chaos, Peter had vanished, and the tape abruptly cut to black, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Tears streamed down my face as I began to comprehend the horrific truth. Peter and his friends were the beast. They were the very monster that had been pursuing me. Sadness mixed with terror as I dropped to my knees, overwhelmed by the realization. The reason I had come was to find Peter. Yet now that I had, I wished I hadn't. I wished I had never set foot in St. Dismas, never uncovered this nightmare. But I had only one choice now. I had to destroy this beast. I had to kill my brother and his friends. This grotesque amalgamation of flesh was an abomination, and it needed to end. I hesitated, the weight of my brother's fate pressing down on me. Could I really do this? Memories flooded my mind. Peter's laughter, our games of tag, the way I used to chase off bullies after school. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Peering over the railing of the atrium, I saw the beast pacing in the lobby, its hulking form a grotesque shadow. It seemed fixated on the orange button, like a sick parody of a kick the can me and Peter played as kids. He used to puppy dog guard the can. This was definitely cheating, and I knew a form of Peter still lay inside the beast. I needed to lure it away from the first and second floors. My plan was to hit the button and escape. The thought of confronting it head-on was too much to bear. It raged in a corner, ripping a chair from the lobby and hurling it across the room. The crash reverberated through the atrium as I ducked behind the railing, the beast glancing up, looking for any sign of my location. I needed a distraction, any noise or light to draw its attention. The elevator dangled before me on its frayed steel cable, and a grim idea struck. I retreated to the laboratory and found a surgical bone saw, its edge rusted and used tainted with what I hoped wasn't old blood. Returning to the elevator shaft, I peered into the flickering darkness of the basement below. With a shaky hand, I removed the last SD card from Peter's camera, holding the digital camera over the edge. Saying a silent prayer, I released my final tie to Peter and watched it plummet down the shaft, shattering with a deafening echo. The beast jerked toward the sound, crashing through the lobby, thundering up the stairs toward the second floor. It stumbled in its haste, crashing down the basement's steps, the floor groaning beneath its weight. With its attention diverted, I began to cut the cable of the elevator, adrenaline coursing through me. I stood precariously in the lift, the single cable that held the steel weight above me quivering with each cut. As the cable frayed, I felt the elevator shift, dropping slightly. I dove back just as the last strand snapped, and I felt the rush of air as the elevator plummeted from the fourth floor, gaining speed as it fell. A cloud of dust erupted from the shaft, and with an ear-splitting crash, the elevator smashed into the basement below. A pained roar echoed from the basement, sending chills down my spine. I knew the beast was injured. Peter and his friends were injured. Sucking on my teeth, I rushed down the stairs 2 at a time. On the second floor, I glanced toward the basement stairs, hidden in a dark corner, and pointed my flashlight down. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I regarded the creature crawling up the stairs, twisted and deformed. Blood leaked from multiple wounds where the elevator had struck. I could hear its bones cracking and reforming as it ascended, inch by agonizing inch. Oh, fuck this. The words escaped my lips, and I turned on my heel, fleeing. I stumbled down the stairs and crashed hard onto the tile floor of the lobby. Sweat slicked my back as my flashlight flew from my hand, skittering beneath a chair. I abandoned my steadfast companion to the asylum. In front of me, next to the front door, loomed a bright orange button. Without thinking, I slammed into the door, my instincts taking over until I remembered the rusted chain securing it. I pressed the orange button, feeling the hum of electricity in the old wires and hearing the groan of the front gate as it opened into the asylum yard. Backpedaling, I collided with a chair and stumbled before dashing up the stairs. The lights flickered faster and faster as I heard the generator shuddering beneath my feet. No, not like this, I screamed, racing up the stairs 2 at a time. As I reached the top, I tripped over something soft and squishy. My shoe sank into the flesh of the beast, and I felt my foot stick fast. I fell, catching myself with my arms. Looking down, I saw small mouths around my shoe digging into the rubber sole, wriggling beneath me. The lights flickered again, dimming noticeably. Its grotesque face melted and reformed a dozen times before I wrenched my foot free, leaving my shoe behind as a treat for the beast. I hope you choke on it. I yelled as I rolled backward, the beast screeching in rage. The lights surged one last time, brightening before the security gate plummeted to the floor, severing the beast's head from its body. Instantly, the creature stopped screeching and wriggling. I fell back on my butt, breathing heavily, as I heard the gate outside begin to close. I sprinted toward the office. The gate outside closed slowly, the sun rising over the mountaintops. I dropped down the trellis and sprinted for freedom. The gate crashed shut behind me with a hollow clang that echoed through the lifeless grounds of St. Dismas, sealing away not just the body of the monster, but the pieces of me it had devoured. I stumbled and fell, dragging myself to my car, feeling the weight of the world pressing me down. The sun shone helplessly in the east, its light spilling across a sky that didn't deserve the dawn. My breath came in ragged bursts as tears blurred the horizon, falling like the memories I was trying to forget. Peter. His friends. They were gone. Stolen by the thing I had faced, the thing still lurking in the dark corners of my mind. In my trembling hand, I clutched the 3 SD cards, the 3 pieces of evidence that could save or damn the world. My fingers curled tighter around them, as if holding on to the last threads of sanity, the last shreds of Peter and the life we once had. We were kids again, laughing in the yard, wrestling over toys, pretending the monsters in our games were harmless. But this monster was real. It was made of nightmares, and I had to make sure it stayed locked away forever. The memories of St. Dismas, the horrors that I had witnessed, could not be unleashed. Not even for the sake of justice, not even to give the world answers. Some truths were too dangerous, too heavy to bear. The tears kept falling as I leaned against the tire, feeling the first warmth of the sun touch my skin, mocking the cold that had settled inside me. This emptiness was my world now, a world without Peter, a world where I was the last to know the truth. I came here for answers, and now that I had them, they were more than I could carry. The SD cards felt like lead in my hand. I looked at them, the proof of all that had happened, all that could destroy us. And then, with a scream that tore itself from the depths of my soul, I threw the first one as far as I could, watching it disappear into the empty field. Then another, and another. Each one a piece of the nightmare, a piece of Peter, a piece of me, gone. I let out a shuddering breath, staring at the empty sky above, the finality settling over me like a heavy cloak. The world would never know. St. Dismas would fade into obscurity, its secrets buried with it. And myself, I would forget. Think that was creepy? The next story takes it to a whole new level. Something is wrong with my Uber driver. Damn, I have known that those 5 tequila shots were a bad idea. I mean, I knew it wasn't a good idea. Tequila isn't exactly a great idea, but sometimes it is. Sorry for the rambling, I'm trying to sober up. This Mexican grill downtown has some killer drink deals and some beautiful ladies that love to dance. I'm trying to get over a horrible breakup I just went through a mere 36 hours ago. A woman I loved cheated on me with one of my friends. We still have to share our apartment until we figure out who is moving out. Always a gamble when both names are on the lease. She wants to work things out, and I don't. Tequila isn't always a good idea, and neither is trying to get over someone you love way too quickly. But screw it. Cheating on me wasn't a good idea either. Jose was going to be my best friend for the night. He made an excellent bartender, and I was having the most wonderful time. I was gonna stay and shut the place down. I danced with some beautiful women and even got a phone number that she typed in for me. I kept pushing too many buttons. Her name was Lola. I asked Lola if she wanted to come back to my apartment, but she politely declined. She was heading back with her friends. I asked Jose for another shot of silver, but he told me I was cut off. Maybe he wasn't meant to be my best friend. He wrote his number on my arm and told me to call him when I got back home. He tried convincing me to hand him my keys over, but I didn't want to hand them over. He threatened to call the cops and tell them I was driving drunk. I handed them over to him. He handed me a water bottle and told me that an Uber was about to be there to take me home. I reached over for someone's half-drank beer, and he pulled it out of my hands. "My friend, your Uber is going to be outside in a minute." He held my arm and helped me out before returning to his post. I walked up to an older, yellow Honda Civic that looked horrible. It was filthy, and all the windows rolled down. The driver had curly brown hair and a flat cap on. He was puffing on a cigar. The cigarette craving was kicking in. "Hey Uber, are you my driver?" He was looking straight forward. "Get in." It sounded like he gargled with gravel and sand with how rugged and raspy his voice was. "Where to?" I muttered out my address. He stomped on the gas and peeled out. My stomach turned and I felt as if the liquor was about to spew out of my mouth. "Hey man, can you slow deep?" "You naughty, naughty boy. Didn't your mother teach you that it's a sin to get so sloppy?" "Hey man, He turned around and I screamed. His eyes were like a hypnotic wheel turning. His tongue was hanging out and was forked just like a snake's. Horns began to sprout out of his head. I closed my eyes and tried to jerk off my seatbelt. Every rug was making it tighter to where I couldn't breathe as good. He began laughing. He was swerving around cars and blaring the horn. Every time it did, my eardrums felt like they would explode. Please, please, I won't ever do this again." That's what they all say. I pulled out my phone and sent Jose a text message. I was letting him know to call the police and track the Uber in case that I die. I dropped my phone when I got the message. "What are you talking about? Are you okay? The Uber driver waited outside for you for a while. I came to check on you and you were already gone." He swerved into the apartment parking lot. The door opened by itself and my body was tossed out after the seatbelt jerked off. It was as if someone extremely strong threw me. I fell face first into the asphalt. Blood began pouring out of my nose. "Don't let me catch you next time." His car set on fire as he drove away. Then it disappeared. I managed to get inside my apartment, and my ex was sitting on the couch in her pajamas. Empty bowl of ice cream in her hands, The Bachelor or some other show on the TV. "Oh my God, baby, what happened?" "I ain't your baby anymore, kiss my ass." I snarled out to her. She had tears in her eyes. I locked myself in the bathroom as I tried to clean myself up and pick all the gravel out of my skin. All the contents of the night went into the porcelain throne. She knocked on the door. "I told you that I was sorry. We can make it work." "I told you that I'm done." I opened the door and stumbled to my room. She caught the door before I could slam it. "I'll let you go to bed and sleep this off. You sure smell like you had an eventful evening. I'll even leave you some Tylenol and water. But don't make me summon that thing again. If you're still with us, you won't believe what comes next." The Shadows of the Grove. Matthew Patterson was a dedicated architect, known for his meticulous designs and unwavering commitment to his work. He originally lived in the small town of Crestwood, but now he was back contracted by his employer to help with the dam project nearby. The town is surrounded by dense forests that whispered secrets only the wind could hear. Matthew had always been fascinated by the woods, but growing up the locals warned him to stay away from a particular area. The Grove, a shadowy section of the forest where strange occurrences were reported. Despite the townsfolk's tales of lost hikers and unexplained sounds echoing at night, Matthew brushed off their superstitions, believing science could explain everything. After several months of exhaustive work on the dam project, Matthew found himself drawn to the Grove. Rumors of a hidden cavern rumored to hold secrets of the earth piqued his interest. He envisioned designing a sustainable energy solution using the area's natural resources. But as he ventured deeper into the woods, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, a coldness creeping into his thoughts that made him second-guess his ambition. One fog-laden evening, armed with only a flashlight and his notebook, Matthew made his way to the Grove. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their twisted branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the last remnants of daylight. The deeper he went, the more the air thickened with an unsettling heaviness. He began to hear faint whispers, carried by the wind, but he dismissed them as the sounds of the forest. He focused on his mission, convinced he would find inspiration in the heart of the darkness. As he reached a clearing, Matthew stumbled upon a series of stone formations arranged in a circle. In the center lay an opening, a gaping mouth of darkness that seemed to absorb all light. Curious and emboldened, he approached the cavern's mouth, feeling an inexplicable pull. Crouching down, he peered inside, the flashlight beam revealing jagged rocks and an unnatural blackness that pulsated, almost alive. Ignoring the voice in his head warning him to leave, Matthew entered the cavern, drawn by an overwhelming curiosity. As he moved further in, the whispers grew louder, and he could hear them forming words, ancient, haunting, and unintelligible. His heart raced. But he pressed on, determined to conquer the unknown. Deeper inside, the temperature dropped, and a dense fog swirled around him, distorting his perception. Matthew tried to keep track of his surroundings, but the darkness wrapped around him like a shroud. Panic began to set in, and just as he considered turning back, he stumbled upon a series of crude drawings etched into the cavern walls. They depicted figures worshipping a massive, shadowy entity, a primordial darkness that loomed over them, its eyes burning with malevolence. A chill swept through him as he realized these were not just remnants of a bygone civilization. They were warnings. He turned to leave, but the whispers intensified, drowning out his thoughts. They became a cacophony of voices, urging him to stay, to listen, to surrender. Something primal awakened within him, a terror that sent shivers down his spine. In a moment of clarity, Matthew bolted toward the entrance, but the darkness swirled around him, an unseen force pulling him back. He stumbled, falling to the ground as a dark mist coiled around his legs. He felt a surge of despair, the very air thickening with an ancient, suffocating power. Desperately, he clawed his way to the surface, escaping the cavern just as a blinding light enveloped him. Matthew emerged from the grove, gasping for air, his heart racing. The town looked eerily familiar yet foreign, as if time had shifted while he was gone. Shadows stretched long and distorted in the fading light, and the whispers that had haunted him in the cave now echoed in the back of his mind. Days turned into weeks, and the experience lingered like a dark stain on his soul. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that something was following him, lurking in the corners of his vision. He could hear the whispers, now indistinguishable from the hum of everyday life. Every time he closed his eyes, the images of the cavern and the strange entity replayed in his mind, a haunting loop he could not escape. Matthew's work began to suffer as he withdrew from friends, consumed by the darkness that had followed him home. He pored over his notes, searching for a rational explanation, a scientific basis for the horrors he had experienced. But no amount of logic could dispel the feeling of being watched, the sense of encroaching dread that accompanied his every step. One night, unable to sleep, Matthew ventured out into the forest once more, driven by an unshakable compulsion to confront what he had unleashed. He found himself back at the grove, the familiar whispering growing louder, swirling around him like a storm. It felt as if the forest was alive, feeding off his fear, pulling him deeper into its embrace. As he reached the cavern entrance, a figure emerged from the shadows, an apparition of twisted forms and swirling darkness, its eyes burning like embers. It spoke in a voice that resonated with his very soul, promising power and knowledge beyond human comprehension, urging him to surrender to the darkness. In that moment of revelation, Matthew understood the true nature of the entity. It was not merely a creature of darkness. It was an ancient force of chaos, waiting for a vessel to carry out its will upon the world. The whispers were not just sounds, they were invitations, calling him to embrace his deepest fears and desires. "No," Matthew screamed, shaking his head violently as he struggled against the overwhelming pull of the darkness. He felt the weight of his choices, the paths he could have taken but hadn't. And for the first time, he realized he could not fight the entity with logic or reason. He remembered the ancient drawings and their warnings. With newfound determination, he began to chant a counter-ritual, using the very energy of the grove to push back against the darkness. The air crackled as he fought against the entity's influence, the ground trembling beneath him. The shadows shrieked in fury, thrashing against his will as Matthew poured his heart into the incantation, drawing the light of his resolve to create a barrier between him and the creature. Slowly, the dark mist began to recede, the whispers turning into agonized cries as the entity writhed in fury. With one final burst of energy, he released a wave of light that pushed the darkness back into the cavern. The entity howled as it was pulled into the depths, the shadows retreating like a tide. The air cleared, and the oppressive weight lifted, leaving Matthew breathless and trembling. As dawn broke over Crestwood, Matthew stood at the edge of the grove, exhausted but relieved. The shadows no longer whispered, they were silent, retreating into the recesses of the forest. Though he believed he had triumphed, the darkness had not been vanquished. It had marked him, and sat patiently as it always had, just beyond the veil. waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon its hidden depths. Returning to town, Matthew vowed to share his story, to warn others about the ancient force that lay in the grove. He began to document his experience, determined to ensure that the primordial darkness would never again awaken. Though the whispers had quieted, he knew the shadows would always linger, a haunting reminder of what lay just beyond the light. And as he walked through the town, the sun shining bright, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, deep within the forest, the darkness waited, patiently watching, always watching, for its next opportunity to rise once more. If you thought the fear was over, think again. The next story is just getting started. I saw something that wasn't a skinwalker, but it isn't something I can explain. Then woods. A place where all good, scary stories happen. I went camping around 3 weeks ago, my second time ever. It has solidified that I will never go camping ever again. The first time I went camping, I was in a place where there were multiple people around, all camping in tents, cabins, and RVs, so obviously nothing would be around. But the last time I went camping was in the middle of the woods behind my house. Before I talk about my experience where I saw this thing up close, this wasn't the first time I saw it. The woods behind my house are big, stretching about 3 miles across. These woods are big, and camping was the first time I really explored the forest. The first time I saw the thing was when I was in my bedroom, on the balcony. The balcony faces the forest, with it being about 20 feet away from the balcony. It was evening, and I was looking at the pretty sky when I saw something moving out of the corner of my eye, on a tree. I quickly turned, thinking to see a squirrel or even a cat, but I saw something else. A big man-like creature, easily over 6 feet tall, skinny body with a darkish brown color. I couldn't see specifics because I only saw it for half a second and it was turned away from me as it jumped to another tree, to where I couldn't see it. I quickly went inside after that, scared of what I saw was real. A few weeks later, my friend, who I shall call Dean for this story, came over and said we should go camping in my woods due to them being so big. Of course, I thought about what I saw that night, but I excused it as the darkness playing tricks on my eyes because I really wanted to go camping with him. A big mistake. 2 days later, we got all our things ready, big tent, food, snacks, firewood, chairs, all you need, and headed into the forest. We walked a mile into the forest and set up camp after finding a good flat area. We set up the tent, put down the wood, and got ready to set up a fire. I was bored, so I decided to go for a walk and explore the forest, because, as I said, I had never really explored the forest. One thing I didn't mention to Dean is that I felt uneasy, and the feeling of being watched during the whole walk there and at the campsite, but instead of staying in the safety of the campsite, I instead went out on that walk. While walking, I stumbled on something I wish I didn't. A dead bear. This bear wasn't just lying on the ground dead from natural causes. This thing was fucking mutilated. The head was torn off, legs were brutally beaten up, stomach was ripped open with the guts thrown out, slashes in the body, and 2 large holes in the main body like a vampire or spider bite. Multiple things from this find horrified me. Not only are bear apex predators, not only can no animal, including humans, do this, the cuts were ridged, not from any cutting tool. This was from claws, most likely the same that were on the body. My mind went to the thing I saw that one night, but that thing was skinny. How could it take a bear and mutilate it like this? I quickly ran back, screaming for Dean. Dean met me halfway, asking what was wrong. I told him everything, about the bear, about the thing I saw that night, and saying how I thought they were connected. You know, I've been feeling unnerved this whole time as well. I just didn't want you to feel worried, Dean said. It was too dark at that point to leave without risking getting lost, so we just stayed there and hoped whatever did that to the bear didn't come back. I was worried while we sat by the fire, making hot dogs. As we sat there, though, we heard branches snapping, movement in the trees, and just overall the vibe of not being alone. After what felt like forever, we went into the tent and went to sleep, but not for long. A bit later, me and Dean wake up to movement outside the tent. We realized it was a bear and relaxed for a second until the bear started making noises at something. Then we hear 2 very clear footsteps and then a scream. This scream was very weird. I have never heard anything like it. I was not a scream of fear, it was like a war cry. It was like a mix of a lion's roar and a quick, repeating, clicking noise. It probably sounded different, but I can't describe it that well. The bear and creature started to make a conundrum while obviously fighting. We couldn't hear much, but it was clear that the bear was losing horribly. After the fighting stopped, Dean and I looked out and saw the creature looking at the bear, equally mutilated as the bear from earlier. That's when the creature looked up at us. And this is where I got to see the creature's full body. This thing was not just over 6 feet tall, but I'd estimate around 7 feet tall. It was skinny and was darkish brown as I saw the first time, but I noticed some things I didn't notice last time. This thing had long arms, around 5 feet, with 6 fingers, not 5, 6, all clawed with the claws extending to at least 5 inches. They were obsidian black and shiny. The legs were similar with the same claws, but only 3 toes. It had to arm like things protruding out its back that were clawed with a single claw, definitely over a foot long, kind of like the necromorph from Dead Space. But its head was the worst part. It was the head of not a deer or wolf or any normal skinwalker creature. It was the head of a spider. The fangs were huge with 8 black beady eyes, with the 2 main ones on the front of the face being bigger with a small red dot in each one. I looked at us for only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity as I stared into its dark, hollow eyes. After that, it simply walked away, leaving us, probably not seeing us as prey. We didn't sleep at all after that, and as soon as dawn hit, we were out of that forest. I have not been back since, and I do not plan to go back. It was the scariest night of my life. I don't know what it was. It was skinny, but not pale like any skinwalker you would see. And the spider head just makes it worse. And it can even fight a bear and win with most likely minimal effort. I talked to my neighbor, who lived in this town for 50 years, about my experience, and he told me something that shocked me. He has known about this creature for a long while. He first encountered this creature only after living in the town for a few months, when he was camping. He saw it in the tree line, observing him. Every time he saw it and looked at it, it quickly turned away. It happened a few more times until he went into his tent. He has encountered the creature multiple times after that, and the creature has never seemed hostile, just curious. Needless to say, I plan to move out soon enough, even though it showed no harm to us. I don't want to see if it will. Plus the thing is horrifying, and I don't want to risk the chance of seeing it every now and then. That was just a taste of the terror ahead. Now for the next nightmare. My cat has been acting strange around my neighbors series. The last few weeks have been some of the most frightening and disturbing days of my life. 3 years ago, I adopted a small white kitten from the local animal shelter. His name was Larry, and he was a very energetic cat. He would always run off and chase everything he saw. He was a good kitten. The reason I talk about him in past tense is because he is no longer with us. His body was found on a road a few miles away. I got to see his body one last time and turned away immediately in disgust. Let's just say it was not in one piece. I can only hope he went quickly. We cremated his body. This story is not about him. A few months ago, I got a new cat from the local animal shelter. The white ones reminded me too much of Larry, so I picked up a black one. His name was Ace, another kitten. Ace was a very strange cat. He was pensive. He never wanted to go outside. I guess I understand, it's not like I want to go outside that much either. My experiences with people have not been great. I've also had dreams where his eyes glow and he looks up to stare at me. He also had a weird thing where sometimes his body would just twitch. It wouldn't be long or anything, just one small twitch, and he would continue with whatever he was doing. Sometimes in these dreams, he would disappear and appear someplace else. I would look away from him, and he would just be there. My stomach would start to feel weird whenever I was around him. It would only get worse from there. The weirdest part about Ace is sometimes he would find his way outside of the house. There is only one place he would go: the neighbors. I don't talk to these guys much, but they're an old couple. The only time I really had a good conversation with them was when they brought over cookies when I moved over. They asked if they could come inside, and I'm like, sure, why not? They were very kind, and nothing seemed wrong with them. So why is my cat going over there? Even when he's not at the neighbor's place, he sits on the couch and looks over at their house. At this point, the nightmares were getting worse, and I felt the need to puke every time I saw him. I'm not sure if this weird stuff has anything to do with my previous trauma from Larry, or if it's just that something is really wrong with this cat. I don't really care at this point. I just want him gone. I considered taking him to the vet, but I was too afraid to even go near him. I had to call someone from the adoption center to pick him up. The second he left, it felt like I was free. I felt less heavy, like a massive weight had been lifted. The nightmares still continued. They're just nightmares, right? I thought. So I decided I would book a therapy session. My computer was in another room though, so I got out of bed and walked out of my room. I saw it. It was back on my couch, staring at the neighbor's house. This time, he slowly turned around and stared me dead in the eyes. I don't know why. I froze. He just turned around and went back to staring at the neighbor's house. What should my next move be? That was the question that burned in my head. Talk to the neighbors. Yes, the neighbors could fix all of this. So I went over to the neighbors and gently knocked on the door. The wife opened the door. "Hi. Do you need anything?" says the wife. Can I ask you something?" I asked. "Sure. Head inside and I'll bring over Gary." I went inside. "Oh, Gary? Come on down," the wife shouted. Gary, who I assume is the husband, walked down the stairs in the room to the left. "You're the neighbor guy, right?" asked Gary. "Yeah," I replied. "How about we head on over to the dinner table?" he suggested. We went over to the dinner table. "So what's your name?" I asked the wife. "I'm Susan. This over here is Gary, as I assume you already knew," she answered. "What did you want to talk about?" "Oh, it's kind of a bit weird. So I got this cat a while ago, right? It has strange and disturbing habits, but one of them includes going over to your place and just hanging around there for hours on end," I explained. "Yeah, we've seen it. I swear I thought that was a stray for the longest time." "You say he's actually yours?" "I wouldn't lose sleep over it. Maybe he just thinks he can go over here for some extra food," asked Gary. "We fed it quite a bit, haven't we, Gary?" remarked Susan. I realized that this conversation probably was not going to lead me to any conclusions, so I decided that this would be a good time to make an offer. "Gary, Susan, would you guys like to have Ace? I've been thinking about getting a puppy soon, and from my experience, they have not been compatible," I said, chuckling a bit near the end. "Oh, I would love to have another cat. Wouldn't you, Gary? I'd hate to take your cat away from you, though. Promise you'll come visit him?" Susan cheered. Wait, what do you mean by strange and disturbing behaviors?" asked Gary. My heart sank. "Oh, haha, he can just be a little overly stoic, you know? It's nothing that bad. It just struck me as kind of odd because my last kitten, may he rest in peace, was a lot more energetic." I said, "All right, we'll take him. What harm could one little kitten do?" He chuckled. Once again, a massive weight had been lifted off of my back. It felt like I could finally breathe again. "All right, well that settles it. I'll bring him over right now," I said. I walked over to the front door, opened it, and there he was. He was nuzzling the neighbor's car. "Oh, there you are." "Of course. Come here, you little bastard," I laughed. I gently grabbed him and brought him to Gary in my arms. "He's all yours," I said. I went back home. The nightmares had finally stopped. For the first time in months, I could finally sleep. Gary was found dead the next day. A part of his throat was ripped out. The cat was nowhere to be found. Some neighbors have claimed that they still see him nuzzling the neighbor's car or waiting at his doorstep. My blood ran cold at the thought of him being anywhere near my house. It didn't help at all that Gary's blood was on my hand. The past week, the nightmares have started up again, and they've been worse than ever. The new nightmares seem to have one sentence that keeps popping up over and over. "It wasn't fast." If that sent shivers down your spine, the next story will leave you breathless. The Kodiak Island incident. Kodiak Island, Alaska, USA. A quiet, friendly, and welcoming place for tourists. But for people like me, living on Kodiak Island is like living on the edge every day. The only thing I have to document my experiences on this island is this dusty old Goodwill Chromebook I just bought after my 5-day trip to Missouri. Now, I can record everything that happens on this deadly soil. I've lived here for maybe 7 years, and I have a lot of stories, but I'll share them in a different post. For now, I just want to document everything that happens here. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I haven't felt safe on this island for years, but last night, it was something else. Something I can't explain, something that still has my hands shaking. I need to write this down while it's fresh before the fear swallows the details. It started just before sundown, around 5 p.m. I was sitting by the window, drinking coffee, staring out at the tree line like I always do. There's something about those trees that's never felt right, like they're hiding secrets, things I'm not supposed to see. But last night, I did see something. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Light fading, shadows stretching, maybe a bear moving between the trees. We get those all the time. But this wasn't a bear. No, it was too tall. Way too tall. And its fur wasn't dark. It was the sickly pale white that seemed to glow against the dimming sky. I told myself it was nothing, just fog catching the last of the light. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel it. Something was watching me. I leaned closer to the window, squinting into the dusk, hoping I was wronged. That's not like an animal. There was no hesitation, no fear. It moved deliberately, like it wanted me to see it. It stepped out from behind the trees, and I swear, my heart stopped. It stood on two legs, towering, its body covered in long, matted fur that clung to its skin in clumps. Its face, God, I don't even know how to describe it. Like a bird, but wrong, so wrong. Its eyes, they were fixed on me, unblinking like it could see straight into my soul. I froze. I faced some dangerous things on this island. Bears, storms, the isolation, but nothing like this. My mind screamed at me to run, to hide, but I couldn't move. I was trapped in its gaze, as if I'd been swallowed by the cold air outside. It didn't move toward me, didn't growl or make any sound. It just stood there, watching, its eyes never leaving mine. I don't know what came over me, but I grabbed a handful of rocks from the porch and threw them as hard as I could. I don't know why. What did I think a few rocks would do against something like that? They hit the ground near its feet, but it didn't even flinch. It just raised its hand, and that's when I saw it. Thick, purple liquid oozed from its fingers, dripping onto the ground with this low, sickening hiss. The smell hit me like a punch to the gut, putrid, rotting, like something long dead. My stomach churned, and I nearly gagged. But I couldn't look away. I was locked in this silent, awful exchange, just me and that thing. And then it did something I'll never forget. It smiled. Not a normal smile. Its beak, or whatever you want to call it, curled unnaturally, as if it knew exactly how terrified I was. I could feel my skin crawl, the hair on the back of my neck standing straight up. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get inside, but my feet were glued to the ground, my heart slamming against my ribs. I don't know how long we stood there, me frozen, it dripping that awful liquid, but suddenly I snapped out of it. I don't even remember turning, but I found myself sprinting back into the house, slamming the door shut so hard the walls shook. I locked every window, every door, double-checked the locks, my hands trembling so bad I could barely manage it. I looked at the clock. It was 5:08. I had only been outside for a couple of minutes, but it felt like an eternity. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want the answers to. I didn't sleep much after that. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face, those eyes, that smile. I stayed up until exhaustion took me, and when I finally woke up this morning, the window was open. And smeared across my door, in thick, dripping streaks, was that same purple liquid. The smell still lingers in the air. It's watching me. I know it is. I can't shake the feeling that something's coming for me. Last night was bad enough with that pale, bird-like thing at the tree line. But what I saw today, it's on a whole other level. And the worst part, I didn't even see all of it. Just enough to know I'm in deep, deep trouble. It started around 4:30 p.m. I was still trying to convince myself that maybe the creature from last night was just some strange animal. Maybe a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. It's been 7 years on this island, and things have always been off. But today it was different. Much worse. I heard it before I saw it. A dragging, scraping sound coming from the woods. Slow and deliberate, like something was pulling itself through the dirt. It was louder than anything I'd heard out here before. Heavier. I didn't want to check. I should have stayed inside, but I couldn't stop myself. My curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what it was. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, already feeling the chill in the air, like the island was warning me to stay put. The woods were darker than they should have been. Clouds had rolled in and everything felt wrong. Still, I walked closer to the tree line, sweeping my flashlight over the underbrush, searching for movement. That's when I saw it. Scales. Huge, shiny black scales, catching the last bit of light from the dying sun. I froze. Whatever those scales belonged to, it was big. Really big. I could hear it moving, slow and deliberate, but I couldn't see all of it. Just the shifting glint of scales as they disappeared behind trees, as if the creature was staying just out of view on purpose. My flashlight flickered, and for a second, I thought I'd lose it completely. But then the light stabilized, and that's when I saw them. Two eyes, staring at me from just beyond the trees. They weren't like any animal's eyes I've ever seen. They were too large, glowing faintly in the darkness, like embers in a dying fire. Deep yellow, with a strange intelligence behind them. They didn't blink, didn't shift away, just locked on me, watching, waiting. The rest of the creature, its body, its face, was hidden in the shadows. I could only make out the shape of its head, broad and looming, but it was like the darkness clung to it, like it didn't want to be seen. But those eyes, they burned through the black, pinning me where I stood. I felt this wave of nausea hit me, like its gaze alone was enough to make me sick. I didn't understand how, but I knew deep down that this thing wasn't just watching me. It was sizing me up. I could feel its focus on me, almost like it was trying to decide if I was worth the trouble. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I couldn't look away. It didn't move closer. Not yet, but I could see its scales shifting again, just beyond the reach of my flashlight, massive and smooth, catching the dim light like polished stone. The way it moved was almost hypnotic, slow and deliberate, like it knew it didn't need to rush. It was in control. Then it let out this low, rumbling sound, like a growl, but deeper. I could feel it in my bones, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. The trees shuddered around me, leaves falling like a soft rain. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I took a step back, my legs shaking, the beam of my flashlight wobbling. That's when I saw it, just the briefest glimpse of its face. Not the whole thing, not even enough to describe, but just a flash as it shifted in the shadows. It had a face, all right. I'm sure of it. But what I saw, it was wrong. It was too smooth, too sleek, like it wasn't finished, or like it was wearing a mask. And its mouth, God, I only caught a second of it, but it was enough. The way its jaw hung open, too wide, like it could swallow me whole in one bite. I stumbled back toward the house, nearly tripping over my own feet. I couldn't keep my eyes off the creature, even though the darkness was swallowing it whole again. Those eyes, though, they never left me. They glowed faintly, like embers, burning into me, even as I backed away. Just before I slammed the door behind me, I heard it again, the scraping sound. Louder this time, closer. Whatever it wasn't in a hurry. It didn't need to be. It knew where I was. It wasn't hunting like an animal. No, this thing was patient. It knew I'd come out again eventually. Once inside, I locked the door, though I know it won't make a difference. If it wanted to get in, it could. Easy. I've been pacing ever since, trying to figure out what I saw. I can't shake those eyes, those terrible, yellow eyes watching me from the shadows. I didn't even see its full form, and that's what scares me the most. I saw just a fraction of it, a glimpse, and it was enough to make me sick with fear. What happens when it decides to show the rest of itself? I think that pale creature from last night was just a warning. A test. But this is different. This one feels like the real threat, and I don't know how long I have before it decides to come back. Missouri feels like another planet right now. I would give anything to be back there, where the only things watching you are the stars. But here it feels like the island itself is alive, like the trees and the ground and the sky are all in on some terrible secret, and I'm stuck right in the middle of it. You thought that was bad? The next story will make you think twice before sleeping tonight. We received a mysterious transmission from deep space. We think it's from God's space. To me, is simply put beautiful. No, I don't mean the endless void that stretches far beyond the horizon into unfathomable depths. Rather, I find the existence of stars, planets, and cosmic phenomena, serene and pristine, that pave the way of finding millions of data in undiscovered science. When you're floating aimlessly through the cosmos, the silence can weigh heavily upon you. For many, the solitude and boredom of space are haunting, and I would agree. In the vastness of the universe, you are but a whisper, insignificant against the backdrop of infinite obscurity. Being grounded on Earth could never compare to the exhilarating isolation of space. My mission is anything but simple, and what it was no longer matters. To be honest, I'd rather spare you the details, for your own safety. Just know this, I wasn't a man of faith, not before, but now I'm not so sure anymore. 3 weeks ago, HQ intercepted a transmission from an unknown signal. While we've encountered similar communications before, often misidentified as echoes from nearby satellites, this one was quite different. I emerged from my standard cryopod to the incessant beeping echoing through the command deck. A transmission from HQ. I tapped the console, bringing the message into clearer focus. The voice crackled through the comms, tense but steady. Captain Cross, we've received a transmission from Rosette Nebula, but something's off. The signal is weak, distorted, barely holding. It's not on any known frequency. We can't trace the source. I stared at the flickering display, confused and dazed. Rosette Nebula? That can't be possible. Are we certain it's originating from the vessel and not a stray satellite? I asked, initializing the caffeine synth dispenser. Confirmed, Captain, the comms officer responded, his voice steady. The signal's unique. It's being transmitted by a device specifically calibrated for Rosette Nebula. No other tech in the sector uses this frequency. Patch it through, I ordered, my voice calm, though the air felt heavier around me. There was a long pause, a static hiss, then the screen illuminated, revealing some sort of symbols. Have we deciphered them yet? Only the first 3 symbols, and we're currently working to decode the remaining characters. HQ, I'll remain on standby for the rest of the message. In the meantime, I'll proceed with my scheduled tasks for the day. A brief silence followed, then came the crisp response. Affirmative, Captain. The Rosette Nebula, commanded by a brilliant man known as Benjamin Armitage. He had made numerous groundbreaking scientific discoveries that had reshaped our understanding of the cosmos. His research on exoplanetary atmospheres and the potential for habitability garnered widespread acclaim, and I had diligently followed his work, drawn to his innovative theories and relentless pursuit of knowledge. Months ago, Benjamin had taken the Rosette Nebula to find a planet that could sustain human life for centuries. Since then, it had simply vanished. Benjamin Armitage had commanded a crew of about 15 souls, each with families, each representing generations of bloodlines. They had simply vanished, forever lost among the stars. Their existence and their findings swallowed by the obscure cosmic void. HQ was quick to label them as annihilation, which was a term reserved for vessels that slipped beyond the boundaries of known space. However, this signal, it seemed to be emanating from it. I immersed myself in my daily tasks, gathering atmospheric readings, carbon pressure levels, and scanning for any new star formations in the vicinity. That's when I heard it. A slow, deliberate tapping through the metal hull. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper, and I mostly ignored it, until it cut through the tranquility of the ship. I paused, straining my ears against the silence that followed, only to be met with an unsettling stillness that felt almost oppressive. Then it came again, a gentle tapping, like fingers drumming on the surface of the universe itself. My pulse quickened as I stepped cautiously towards the command room, until the alarms rang. Status report. I barked, my voice barely rising above the cacophony of sirens. The ship's AI flickered to life, its voice steady but laced with urgency. Warning, unidentified object detected in proximity. Trajectory indicates potential collision course. Estimated time to impact, 3 minutes. My heart raced as I glanced at the sensor readouts, scrolling rapidly across the screen. An unidentified object? My mind raced through possibilities, each more chilling than the last. What have I stumbled upon? I gripped the console, my knuckles white as I focused on the blaring alerts. Divert all power to shields. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, I commanded, the weight of command settling heavily on my shoulders. Then, as abruptly as it had started, The alarms fell silent. The oppressive stillness enveloped me, leaving only the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I was alone with my thoughts, the tension thick enough to slice. Suddenly, HQ crackled to life over the comms, the voice of my superior cutting through the silence. "Captain Cross, it seems that a vessel is within your vicinity." I couldn't help but smirk, a bitter taste in my mouth. "I don't suppose I'll be assigned to find out what it is?" "It is heavily damaged, and we need you to investigate," the voice replied, lacking any trace of hesitation. A heavy sigh escaped me. Of course, they would send me. After all, I was an experiment gone wrong. As I prepared my spacesuit, the familiar routine grounded me amidst the chaos of uncertainty. The fabric of the suit felt reassuring against my skin. I meticulously checked the seals, ensuring they were airtight, and secured my helmet, the visor reflecting the dim lights of the command deck. Once I was ready, I took a deep breath and stepped into the airlock, my heart pounding in rhythm with the mechanical whir of the closing hatch. With a hiss, the chamber depressurized, and the door to the outer void slid open, revealing the damaged hull of the lost vessel. HQ had sent me to find it, and now I stood at the threshold of obscurity. The journey across the void was eerie, my boots pushing off against the jagged remnants of the ship. As I glided toward the entrance, I felt the cold embrace of the void wrapping around me. Once inside, the carbon pressures surged, and to my astonishment, they stabilized. A miracle. The oxygen systems were still operational. Inside of the vessel was dark. I flicked on the helmet's night vision, illuminating the darkened interior with a spectral green glow. The sheer size of the ship was overwhelming. Massive corridors stretched into the shadows, but a sinister stillness pervaded the air. Not a soul in sight. The silence was deafening. I cautiously ventured deeper into the belly of the beast, my footsteps muffled by the thick silence. The walls, scarred and dented from external damage, seemed to whisper secrets of the lives that once thrived here. As I explored, remnants of humanity emerged from the darkness. Personal effects scattered about, a half-finished meal. Then, I found the captain's quarters. The door hissed open, revealing a space cluttered with the echoes of its occupant. A cabinet caught my eye, its surface adorned with scratches and wear. I approached, my fingers trembling as I opened it, revealing a journal. The initials BA were etched into the cover, along with the name of the vessel, Rosette Nebula. "What?" I murmured, disbelief washing over me. Had I truly found the lost ship? It had come into my grasp, slipping through the fingers of fate. But then, the helmet's night vision flickered and cut out, plunging me into an impenetrable darkness. I stood still, the absence of light amplifying my senses. Deep into the blackness, I peered, but all I found was a suffocating void filled with my own thoughts. The sound of my heartbeat echoed like a distant drum, reverberating through the four walls of my mind. Here, in this forsaken vessel, the weight of isolation pressed down on me, mingling with the chilling realization that I may not be alone. As I stood in the shadows of the captain's quarters, the eerie stillness was shattered by the familiar crackle of the comms. HQ came online, their static-filled voices cutting through the suffocating silence. "Captain Cross, report your findings," the voice of Commander Hayes came through, clipped and professional. "I've located the lost vessel," I replied, forcing the words past the knot in my throat. "The Rosette Nebula is here, but there's not a soul present. It's as if the crew vanished into thin air." I felt a chill run down my spine as I refrained from mentioning the journal. "Understood," Hayes replied. "We're analyzing the signal from the vessel. We've decoded the initials from the transmission. IHI. IHI? I echoed, brow furrowing. "Nothing further?" "Negative. That's all we have for now. We'll keep you updated if anything changes," Hayes said, and the transmission went quiet, leaving only the faint hum of the ship's systems in my ears. Then, as if the air itself thickened, a voice emerged from the darkness, thin and raspy. "You shouldn't be here." I whirled around, my heart racing. A figure loomed in the corner, skeletal and ghostly, as if he had been plucked from the very fabric of time. The man looked as if he had died years ago, his skin stretched tight over bone, eyes sunken and hollow. Oh God, his face was hollow, crisp and dark. "I found a star," he rasped, "a habitable one. I wanted to bring it to Earth, but I found something else. I've found annihilation." His gaze bore into me, a mix of madness and reverence. A deity, His voice trailed off, lost in the echo of his own despair. I wanted immortality, and he has given me. My breath caught in my throat as the old man stepped closer, his frail hands reaching out. My ancestors foretold the prophecy. In a panic, I stumbled backward, but he lunged at me, hands tightening around my throat. A struggle erupted between us. His strength belied his frail appearance. I fought against his grip, adrenaline surging through my veins. With a burst of energy, I broke free and bolted toward the exit, sprinting through the dark corridors of the Rosette Nebula. My mind raced as I navigated the wreckage, heart pounding in my chest. I could feel his presence hot on my heels, a specter of madness from the depths of the void. Reaching my ship, I slammed the hatch behind me, heart pounding as I engaged the airlock mechanisms. Lock it down, lock it down. I urged myself, fingers flying over the controls as I sealed myself inside my vessel. The hiss of the airlock filled the cabin, a sound of safety, at least for now. Just as I secured the hatch, HQ crackled back online. Captain Cross, we've been monitoring your live feed. We need to discuss your situation. I took a deep breath, the air feeling heavy with dread. I need to get out of here now, I said, urgency lacing my voice. There's something aboard this ship, someone who should not be here. Hold your position, Hayes commanded. We need to analyze the full situation. The transmission data suggests the IHI sequence is connected to protocols. It could be crucial. I don't care about protocols. I'm telling you, there's a man here. He claims to have found immortality. I shouted, desperation clawing at my chest. Maintain control, Captain, Hayes replied, but I could hear the tension in his voice. We'll assess your situation from here. As I sat in my ship, the weight of the encounter settled over me like a suffocating shroud. I locked my gaze on the dark viewport, heart racing, fully aware that I was no longer just a captain exploring the cosmos. I was now a witness to something far more terrifying, something that had stirred from the depths of the Rosette Nebula, and it hungered for attention, desperate for answers. I read through the journal entries. B.A. Benjamin Armitage. Inside, the ink was smudged, some pages worn and torn, but the words were still legible. They told a story. His initial entries started hopeful, the same optimism I had, the same ambition, the same thirst for discovery. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. The words became darker, more erratic. Benjamin Armitage and his crew had discovered something far out, deep in space, something ancient, buried beneath the surface of a rogue planet. At first, they thought it was a piece of alien technology. But it wasn't. It was something alive. The entries began to fragment. He spoke of voices in his head, of strange symbols appearing on the walls of the ship, symbols that hadn't been there before. His crew began to change, mentally, then physically. He tried to explain it to Earth, to tell them what they had found, but they dismissed him. They called him delusional, a man driven mad by isolation. But it was the last few entries that chilled me to my core. They weren't written in ink anymore. They were scratched within the confines of the pages. We are not meant for this. We are not meant to inherit the stars. We are not meant to understand them. He watches. He waits. Do not follow. The more I read, the more I felt the same pull that the captain must have felt. That awful, magnetic tug that kept me turning the pages, even though every fiber of my being screamed to stop. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the truth anymore, but I kept reading. I had to. The final entry contained symbols, the same ones HQ had initially found. Delta Side, Delta Det, checked, as annihilation. The man I had found aboard the vessel. It was Benjamin Armitage. The silence in the vessel was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. Just as I began to steady my breath, the comms crackled to life. An ancient voice filtered through, its words jumbled and incoherent. Annihilation. The AI interface flickered to life, struggling to decipher the distorted sounds. As the words emerged clearer, a chill ran down my spine. Dath, ha, dat. It repeated, and then the single word followed, almost like a chant. Annihilation. What are you? I called out into the void, my voice trembling against the oppressive darkness. Annihilation, the voice returned, eerily echoing my own question. It felt as if the sound had seeped into my mind, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. Panic surged through me. I stumbled backward, my legs giving way as I collapsed onto the cold metal floor. In an instant, the world faded away, and I was swept into a universe of some sort, a singular celestial body, a radiant star encircled by a luminous moon. This world. It had bloody lakes. Captain Ethan Cross, the voice resonated, deep and resonant like the rumbling of distant thunder. It filled the emptiness of space, reverberating within my very essence. You have wandered far, yet you seek what should remain hidden. What the fuck are you? I stammered, the enormity of the being overwhelming me. It defied comprehension, its form shifting in a way that defied all logic, something that shouldn't exist. I am he who dwells in the shadows between stars, the entity replied. I am the truth that dwells beyond the veil of your understanding. You see, Benjamin Armitage sought the stars, and in his arrogance, he attempted to claim them as his own. His sin was to reach for what was never meant for mortal hands. He lives, but his existence is now one of eternal servitude, chained by his ambition. So, he's not dead? I gasped, the pieces beginning to fit together like fragments of a shattered mirror. No, the voice echoed, its tone both melancholic and accusatory. He is condemned, a shadow of what he once was, roaming the halls of his dreams, forever haunted by his failure. You tread the same path, Captain. Your mission is akin to his. You will meet the same fate if you continue. But I have to find it, I protested, desperation bubbling within me. I need to know. Humanity needs to know. Knowledge is a double-edged sword, the voice cautioned, its voice shifting to a softer timbre. Your desire blinds you, for the truth is a burden too heavy to bear. The stars you seek may yield answers, but they may also consume you. Do not follow in his footsteps. Turn back while you still can. As the cosmic deity's words washed over me, a whisper broke through the ethereal conversation, indistinct yet insistent. No, no, no. What is that? I asked. The whisper grew louder, more frantic, reverberating in my mind. Turn back, find rest. Suddenly, the celestial landscape began to dissolve, and darkness enveloped me. I jolted awake, gasping for breath, finding myself confined within the cryptic pod of my ship. It had all been a dream? Being alone in the void for so long has taken its effect on me. But nevertheless, space is beautiful to me. I am sending this final log before my next mission, which is to find the remnants of a planet that contains elements of habitual substances. Wish me luck. As I recorded my final log, an incessant beeping echoed through the command deck. A transmission from HQ? I tapped the console, bringing the message into clearer focus. The voice crackled through the comms, tense but steady. Captain Cross, we've received a transmission from the lost Rosette Nebula. Annihilation.